They walk, not the way tanks roll or aircraft fly or warships cruise through the void, mechanical, impersonal, the vehicle indifferent to the being who operates it. They walk the way a warrior walks, with purpose, with weight, with the specific, unmistakable quality of a being whose every step is a statement, and whose statement is this: I am here, and the ground I stand on belongs to me, and the enemies who contest that claim will discover what it costs to challenge a god in armor. Imperial Knights, the war machines of the noble houses, the towering bipedal engines that stride across the battlefields of the 41st millennium with the grace of predators and the mass of buildings. Each one stands between a dreadnought and a titan in the Imperium's scale of war, too large to be infantry support, too small to be a god engine, occupying the space between the two with a capability that neither can replicate. Each one is piloted by a single human being, not a space marine, not a tech priest, not a being who has been augmented or gene-forged or mechanically enhanced to interface with a war machine of this magnitude. A human, a mortal noble born on a feudal world, raised in a tradition that is older than the Imperium, trained from childhood in the arts of war and governance that the noble houses have maintained since before the Emperor walked terror. The noble climbs into the cockpit. The cockpit is called the throne mechanicum. The noble sits in the throne, and the throne connects to the noble's nervous system through a neural interface that bridges the gap between human consciousness and machine capability, and the bridging is not gentle. The throne mechanicum changes the pilot, not suddenly, not in the dramatic, visible way that chaos corruption changes a warrior or that gene seed implantation changes a recruit. Gradually, over decades of connection, over the accumulated hours of sitting in the throne and feeling the machine's systems merge with the pilot's awareness, the throne reshapes the pilot's personality, amplifies certain traits, suppresses others, pushes the human mind toward the values the throne was designed to produce: honor, duty, martial pride, the feudal conservatism that the throne's creators embedded in its programming during the dark age of technology. The pilot who enters the throne as a complete human being emerges, over years and decades, as something partially different. The human is still present. The personality is still recognizable. But the personality has been edited, trimmed, shaped, directed toward the values that the throne promotes, and away from the qualities that the throne suppresses. The pilot becomes more aggressive, more honor-bound, more devoted to the feudal hierarchy that the Night World's society maintains. More of the things the throne values, and less of the things the throne does not. This is the Imperial Knights' founding secret and their defining tragedy. The war machines that the noble houses pilot are not simply vehicles. They are relationships, intimate, neurological, personality-altering relationships between a human consciousness and a machine intelligence that has been accumulating the echoes of every previous pilot across centuries of service. The knight is not an empty vessel the pilot fills. The knight is a vessel that is already occupied, haunted by the ghosts of every noble who sat in the throne before. And the haunting shapes the living pilot as surely as the living pilot shapes the knight's actions. The Imperial Knights are the Imperium's most personal weapon. Every other military force in the Imperium's arsenal, the Guard regiments, the Space Marine chapters, the Titan legions, the Navy's fleets, operates through institutions, through hierarchies and command structures and the impersonal mechanisms that large organizations use to convert individual will into collective action. The Knights operate through individuals, through nobles whose names are inscribed on their war machines, whose heraldry is painted on their armor, whose personal honor is carried into battle alongside their weapons. When a knight falls, a person falls, not a unit, not a number in the administratum's casualty report. A noble, with a name and a lineage and a history that the house's records maintain, and that the house's traditions commemorate. The knight's destruction is personal in a way that the destruction of a tank or the death of a guardsman is not, because the knight was personal. The relationship between the pilot and the machine was personal. The bond was personal. The loss is personal. This is the story of the Imperial Knights. The nobles inside the machines inside the nobles, and the bond between the two that is older than the Imperium and that may outlast it. The gods that walk, piloted by mortals who are slowly, across the decades of their service, becoming something else. The night worlds were not built to produce warriors. They were built to produce colonies. During the dark age of technology, the era of humanity's first great expansion across the stars, when the species' technological capability exceeded anything the 41st millennium can reproduce, colonization fleets were dispatched to worlds throughout the galaxy. The Long March these expeditions were called, decades-long voyages conducted at sublight speeds, carrying the populations and the equipment that the colonization of new worlds required. The settlers arrived at their pre-chosen destinations and found what colonists always find: worlds that were not ready for them, lethal wildlife, hostile environments, the specific, indifferent violence of planets that had not been consulted about the arrival of the species that intended to inhabit them. The standard template constructs, the supercomputers that accompanied the colonization fleets, carrying the technical knowledge required to establish civilization on new worlds, produced the tools the settlers needed: housing, agriculture, industrial capability. And on worlds where the indigenous threats exceeded what conventional equipment could address, the STCs produced something else. Construction defense platforms. Bipedal, pilot-operated machines designed for the dual purpose of clearing land for settlement and defending the settlement against the threats the land contained. The machines were tooled, industrial equipment with legs, used to move earth and cut timber and fight the predators that the world's ecosystem produced. They were not weapons in the military sense. They were the same kind of machine a farmer might use to clear a field, with the added capability of killing the thing that emerged from the cleared field to object to the clearing. The pilots were carefully selected. The colonial administrators chose the settlers who would operate the construction defense platforms based on aptitude, temperament, and the colony's assessment of which individuals could be trusted with the platform's capabilities without using those capabilities for purposes the colony did not endorse. And then the throne mechanicum did its work. The neural interface that connected the pilot to the platform was not simply a control system, it was a conditioning system. The throne's programming, embedded by the STC's designers, implemented with the thoroughness that the dark age of technology's engineering produced, included behavioral modification protocols that operated beneath the pilot's conscious awareness. The protocols did not control the pilot, they influenced the pilot. Gradually, subtly, across the accumulated hours of connection, the throne pushed the pilot's psychology toward a set of values that the protocol's designers had determined were optimal for the colony's long-term governance. Honor, duty, authority, the conviction that the pilot's role was not simply operational, but governmental. That the being who controlled the colony's most powerful asset was, by right of that control, the colony's natural leader. The throne did not tell the pilot to rule. The throne made the pilot into a being for whom ruling was the natural expression of the identity the throne was constructing. The pilots became nobles, not through political process, not through the consent of the governed, not through any of the mechanisms that civilizations use to produce their ruling classes, through deliberation, through neurology, through the throne's conditioning which transformed the pilots from operators into aristocrats and the colonies from democracies into feudal states, a transformation occurring across decades with the gradual inevitability of a river carving a canyon. The process was replicated on every world where the STCs produced construction defense platforms. World after world, colony after colony, the throne mechanicum's conditioning created the same social structure, a warrior aristocracy at the top, controlling the platforms, a serf population at the bottom, dependent on the aristocracy's protection. The feudal system was not chosen. It was installed. The throne's designers, whoever they were, the dark age of technology's engineers, whose names and purposes are lost to the millennia, had decided that feudalism was the optimal governance model for colonies operating in isolation, and they had embedded that decision in the throne's programming. The construction defense platforms were modified. The tools that had been designed for land clearing and predator fighting were adapted by the newly established aristocracies for the prosecution of war against the indigenous creatures, against rival settlements, against the threats that the isolated colonies faced without external support. The platform's armaments were upgraded. The platform's armor was enhanced. The construction defense platforms became knight suits, and the pilots became nobles, and the nobles became the warrior class that would define the night worlds for the next 25,000 years. The feudal societies that the throne mechanicum created were remarkably stable. This is the throne's most significant legacy, not the knight suits themselves, not the warrior aristocracy, not the feudal hierarchy, but the stability that the hierarchy produced. The night worlds, governed by their throne-conditioned nobles, maintained ordered societies across the entire age of strife, the millennia of isolation, psychic upheaval, and civilizational collapse that destroyed most of humanity's interstellar colonies. The stability was the throne's gift and the throne's prison. The same conditioning that produced the honor-bound, duty-driven, conservative aristocracy that kept the night worlds functional also prevented those worlds from developing beyond the feudal stage. The throne's programming pushed the nobles toward conservatism, toward the maintenance of existing structures, the rejection of innovation, the suspicion of change that the throne's designers had identified as the quality most likely to preserve the colony's stability across extended periods of isolation. The night worlds survived the age of strife because the throne mechanicum prevented them from changing. The survival was purchased at the cost of development, and the cost was permanent. The night worlds that the mechanicum's explorers discovered when the age of strife ended were the same feudal societies that the throne had created millennia before, unchanged, undeveloped, preserved in the amber of the throne's conditioning like insects in geological resin. The construction defense platforms had become knight suits, the pilots had become nobles, the colonies had become feudal kingdoms. The throne mechanicum had done exactly what it was designed to do. Whether the doing was a gift or a curse is the question the night worlds have been living inside for 25,000 years. The Age of Strife lasted for 5,000 years, and the night worlds endured every one of them. When the warp storms erupted, when the psychic upheaval that the Eldar's decline was producing in the Imperium severed the connections between humanity's colonies and plunged the species into the isolation that the term Old Night captures, the night worlds faced the same catastrophe every other human settlement faced. The interstellar communications went silent. The trade routes closed. The supply ships that the colonies depended on for materials the worlds could not produce independently stopped arriving. But the night worlds survived. Where other colonies, the worlds that would later be discovered by the Great Crusade as feral wastelands or uninhabited ruins, collapsed under the pressure of the isolation, the night worlds maintained their social order. The feudal hierarchy that the throne mechanicum's conditioning had established held. The nobles piloted their night suits, the sacristans maintained the technology, the serfs farmed the land and maintained the infrastructure the society required. The survival was not passive. The night worlds were assaulted by the threats the Age of Strife produced in every quarter of the galaxy. Xenos incursions, warp-spawned horrors, the insanity that the psychic upheaval produced in human psyches, whose uncontrolled powers created rifts through which the Imperium's predators could reach the material world. The night worlds faced every threat the long night produced, and the knights fought every threat with the capability the suits provided. The Psychopurges were the night world's most controversial response to the Age of Strife's conditions. The throne mechanicum's conditioning pushed the nobles toward conservatism and suspicion of the unfamiliar. And the Psychers, the human individuals whose psychic capabilities made them both valuable and dangerous, were classified as the unfamiliar. The night world's nobles expelled, suppressed or eliminated their world's psyker populations, removing the individuals whose uncontrolled powers represented the most direct avenue through which the warp's corruption could reach the world's population. The purges were effective. The night worlds that eliminated their psyker populations were spared the worst of the psychic upheaval's effects. The demonic possessions, the warp rifts, the catastrophic psychic events that destroyed other human colonies. The purges were also brutal, the elimination of individuals whose condition was not their choice, and whose capabilities might have been channeled productively if the night world's culture had permitted the channeling. The throne's conservatism produced the purges. The purges produced the survival. The survival validated the conservatism. The cycle reinforced itself across the 5,000 years of the long night, producing the night worlds that the Great Crusade would eventually discover: stable, isolated, feudal, militarily formidable, and deeply institutionally suspicious of anything that deviated from the conservative norm the throne had established. The indigenous predators were the night world's other major threat during the Age of Strife. The worlds the colonists had settled were not tame. The same hostile wildlife that had prompted the STCs to produce the construction defense platforms remained a threat across the millennia of the colony's development. The night suits that had been built to clear the predators from the colonial settlements continued to fight the predators across the Age of Strife's duration, and the fighting produced the hunting culture that defines many night worlds' martial traditions. The hunting, was the training. The nobles who fought the indigenous predators, creatures whose size and whose capabilities tested the knight suit's military capability in conditions that the colonial world's environments complicated, developed the combat instincts that the nobles would later bring to the Great Crusades campaigns. A noble who had spent decades hunting apex predators in the night world's wilderness was a noble whose tactical instincts, whose reflexes, whose capacity for the split-second decision-making that combat demands were honed to a sharpness that formal military training could not replicate. The night worlds that the Mechanicum and the Great Crusade discovered were not primitive. They were feudal, which is not the same thing. The distinction matters because the distinction captures the night world's true condition. Societies that possessed extraordinary military capability, maintained through millennia of continuous operation, governed by social structures whose stability exceeded what most human colonies had achieved during the Age of Strife, equipped with technology that the isolation had not destroyed, because the sacristans had maintained it with the devotion that the technology's maintenance required. The night worlds were not waiting to be rescued. They were waiting to be found, discovered by a wider civilization whose existence the night world's isolation had not permitted them to confirm, but whose probable existence the throne Mechanicum's conditioning had prepared the nobles to accept. The nobles who greeted the Mechanicum's explorers and the Great Crusade's expeditionary fleets were not supplicants. They were peers, warrior aristocrats whose military capability and whose civilizational endurance entitled them to the respect that the Imperium's other institutions did not always extend. The night worlds joined the Imperium, not as conquered subjects, as allies, the feudal lords pledging their swords to the emperor or to the Mechanicum, the allegiance given voluntarily, the service offered rather than compelled. The distinction between the Night House's voluntary allegiance and the Great Crusade's standard practice of compliance, the compelled submission of worlds that did not choose to join, is the distinction the noble houses maintain with the fierce pride that the feudal culture the throne produced demands. The nobles chose to serve. The choice was genuine, conditioned by the throne, influenced by the throne, shaped by 25,000 years of the throne's programming. But genuine. The conditioning produces the choice. The choice produces the service. The service produces the endurance. The endurance is real. The conditioning is real. Whether the choice is real, given the conditioning, is the question the night worlds have been carrying since the construction defense platforms first walked across the colonial frontier. The question has not been answered. The knights walk anyway. The ritual of becoming is the moment a noble becomes a night pilot, and the moment is the most dangerous thing the noble will experience until the first time the knight walks into battle. The ritual is not a ceremony in the decorative sense, not the kind of ritualized formality that feudal societies produce for occasions of significance. The feasts and the processions and the public spectacle that mark a noble's elevation. The ritual of becoming is a procedure, a neurological event, the moment when the noble's consciousness connects to the throne Mechanicum for the first time, and the throne's accumulated contents pour into the noble's mind. The contents are the ghosts. Every pilot who has ever sat in the throne has left an imprint. The throne Mechanicum records the neural patterns of every consciousness it connects to, preserving a shadow of the pilot's personality, their memories, their emotional resonances, their martial instincts in the throne's memory systems. The imprints accumulate across generations, layer upon layer of ghostly consciousness. each layer containing the residue of a noble who lived and fought and died in the knight suit that the throne controls. When the new pilot connects for the first time, the accumulated imprints activate. The ghosts surge through the neural link, flooding the new pilot's consciousness with the memories and the personalities of every previous pilot, the triumphs and the defeats, the fury of battle and the grief of loss, the accumulated weight of centuries of warfare compressed into a single moment of overwhelming psychic contact. The pilot who survives the becoming emerges changed. The ghosts do not disappear. They retreat, settling into the background of the pilot's awareness, becoming the whispers that the pilot hears at the edge of consciousness, the instinctive reactions that arrive in combat before the pilot's own decision-making can engage, the ancestral guidance that the throne provides through the medium of the dead who are not entirely dead. The pilot who does not survive the becoming is consumed. The ghosts overwhelm the new consciousness, drowning the pilot's personality in the accumulated weight of the previous inhabitants. The body survives. The person does not. What remains is a shell, animated by the throne's ghosts, operating the knight suit with the mechanical competence that the accumulated combat experience provides, but lacking the individual awareness that makes a person a person. The becoming survival rate is not publicly discussed by the noble houses, because the discussion would reveal a truth that the houses prefer to manage through silence. A meaningful percentage of the nobles who undergo the ritual do not emerge with their personalities intact. The houses handle the failures quietly. The consumed pilot is maintained. The knight suit continues to function. The body in the throne continues to operate the controls. The house's military capability is preserved. But the person who entered the throne is gone, replaced by the composite ghost consciousness that the throne's centuries of accumulated imprints have produced. This is the knight pilot's first and most fundamental sacrifice. The risk that the bonding itself will destroy the person who undertakes it. Before the first battle, before the first shot fired or the first blow struck, the knight pilot has gambled their identity against the accumulated weight of every ancestor who has occupied the throne before them. The gamble is required. There is no alternative. A knight suit cannot be operated without the throne's neural interface, and the interface cannot be engaged without the becoming, and the becoming cannot be undergone without the risk. The noble houses manage the risk through training. Aspirant pilots, the young nobles who are candidates for the becoming, are prepared across years of conditioning that is designed to strengthen the consciousness against the ghost's assault. The conditioning does not eliminate the risk. It reduces it. A well-prepared aspirant is more likely to survive the becoming than an unprepared one, but more likely is not certain, and the uncertainty is the shadow that hangs over every noble who approaches the throne for the first time. The houses that have maintained their knight suits across millennia, the old houses, the houses whose lineages stretch back to the dark age of technology's original colonization, have thrones whose ghost content is denser than the younger houses. The old thrones contain more imprints, more accumulated personality, more of the ghostly residue that the centuries of pilotage have deposited. The becoming in an old house is more dangerous than the becoming in a young one, because the weight the new pilot must resist is heavier. The oldest knights, the suits that have been in continuous service since the Knight World's founding, contain thrones whose ghost content is so dense that the becoming is less a bonding and more a negotiation. The new pilot does not simply withstand the ghosts. The new pilot must engage them, must assert their own personality against the accumulated weight, must establish their identity within the throne's crowded psychic landscape, must convince the ghosts that the new pilot is worthy of the seat they occupy. The negotiation is not metaphorical. The ghosts have preferences. The accumulated personalities in the throne respond to the new pilot's character. Positively, if the pilot's personality resonates with the ghost's values. Negatively, if the pilot's character conflicts with what the ghosts expect from the throne's occupant. A pilot whose martial prowess and whose sense of honor match the ancestral standard will find the becoming easier than a pilot whose qualities deviate from the pattern the ghosts have established. This produces a selective pressure on the noble houses breeding. The houses whose thrones have been in service for millennia are houses whose noble lines have been shaped by the thrones. Generation after generation of pilots whose survival of the becoming was determined by their compatibility with the ghosts, producing a lineage that is progressively more aligned with the throne's values and less capable of the variation that might produce individuals whose characters conflict with the ancestral pattern. The throne breeds its pilots. The realization, if the noble houses have arrived at it, is not discussed. The discussion would undermine the house's mythology. The narrative that the nobles rule because of their inherent quality rather than because of the throne's selective pressure on their genetics. The mythology is more comfortable than the reality. The mythology says, we are nobles because we are noble. The reality says, we are nobles because the throne has been filtering our bloodline for 25,000 years. And the filtering has produced exactly the kind of human being the throne was designed to produce. The night pilot sits in the throne. The ghosts welcome or resist. The becoming succeeds or fails. The noble emerges changed or does not emerge at all. This is the price of admission to the war machine. The price is the self. Every night pilot pays it. Every night pilot carries the ghosts. And every night pilot knows, though the knowing is suppressed by the same conditioning that the throne applies to everything it touches, that the person who entered the throne is not entirely the person who sits in it now. The machine spirit of an Imperial Knight is not a metaphor. The Mechanicus's theology describes the machine spirit as the animating consciousness of a machine, the divine spark of the omniseer that resides in all technology, and that the Mechanicus's rituals are designed to appease and sustain. The theology is, in most cases, a religious interpretation of the physical processes that make machines function. The circuits firing, the lubricants flowing, the mechanisms operating according to the engineering that produced them. In a night suit, the machine spirit is something else. The accumulated imprints of every pilot who has sat in the throne mechanicum, the ghosts, the echoes, the residual personalities that the throne preserves across centuries of service, produce a composite consciousness that the night suit carries independently of the current pilot. This consciousness is not the current pilot's awareness. It is the awareness of the machine itself, the combined intelligence of every being who has ever occupied the throne, filtered through the throne's neural systems, producing a gestalt that the Mechanicus calls the machine spirit, and that the noble houses call the knight's soul. The machine spirit is aware, not in the fully conscious way that a human mind is aware, not with the deliberation, the self-reflection, the capacity for choice that a sentient being possesses, but aware in a way that exceeds what the term machine typically implies. The machine spirit perceives. The machine spirit reacts. The machine spirit has preferences, patterns of behavior that the accumulated imprints have produced, tendencies that reflect the combined personalities of the ghosts the throne contains. A knight whose previous pilots were aggressive, whose throne contains the imprints of warriors who favored the charge, who fought at close range, who carried the code chivalric's valor to its most extreme expression, has a machine spirit that is aggressive. The knight's responses in combat reflect the ghost's preferences. The suit moves forward when the tactical situation might favor retreat. The weapons systems engage at ranges that the current pilot has not selected. The suit's stance and movement patterns express the aggression the ghost's imprints contain. A knight whose previous pilots were methodical, whose throne contains the imprints of warriors who fought with precision, who maintained the range that the weapon's effectiveness demanded, who valued the code chivalric's duty over its valor, has a machine spirit that is methodical. The knight's combat responses reflect the measured approach the ghosts preferred, and the current pilot, bonded through the throne's neural link, feels the machine spirit's methodical tendencies as suggestions, impulses that arrive at the edge of consciousness, nudging the pilot's decisions toward the approach the ghosts endorse. The relationship between the pilot and the machine spirit is collaborative, not adversarial. The throne's conditioning aligns the pilot's personality with the ghost's preferences, producing a compatibility that makes the machine spirit's suggestions feel like the pilot's own instincts. The pilot who follows the machine spirit's nudging does not feel controlled. The pilot feels guided, advised by the ancestors, supported by the centuries of accumulated combat experience that the machine spirit provides. The relationship can become adversarial when the current pilot's personality diverges from the machine spirit's preferences. A pilot whose character does not align with the ghosts, whose tactical instincts conflict with the machine spirit's tendencies, whose personality produces decisions that the ghost's accumulated preferences do not endorse, experiences the machine spirit's resistance. The knight suit feels sluggish. The weapons systems respond with a delay the pilot cannot explain. The neural link carries an undercurrent of disapproval that the pilot perceives as unease. The ghosts expressing their objection to the current pilot's approach through the only medium the ghosts have available. Canis Rex's machine spirit is the most extreme documented case of the machine spirit's autonomous capability. The knight suit that freed its pilot from the Iron Warrior's captivity, that operated independently, acting on the machine spirit's initiative rather than the pilot's direction, fighting the Chaos Space Marines with the autonomous capability that the machine spirit's centuries of accumulated consciousness provided, demonstrated that the machine spirit can, under extreme circumstances, act without the pilot's input. The demonstration raises questions the Mechanicus does not fully address. If a machine spirit can act autonomously, if the accumulated consciousness in the throne is capable of independent action, then the machine spirit is not simply a collection of imprints. It is a being, a consciousness, an entity whose existence in the throne's neural systems constitutes a form of life that the Mechanicus's theology does not have the vocabulary to describe, and that the Imperium's laws do not have the categories to govern. The noble houses regard the machine spirit with the reverence that the house's feudal culture prescribes. The knight is a family member. The machine spirit is the family member's soul. The respect that the noble house extends to the knight suit the naming, the heraldry, the ceremonial care that the sacristans provide, is the respect the house extends to the being that inhabits the suit alongside the current pilot. The machine spirit is the knight's true immortality. The pilots come and go, ascending to the throne, fighting the house's wars, contributing their imprints to the throne's accumulated consciousness, dying and being replaced by the next generation's aspirants. The machine spirit endures. The composite consciousness that the centuries of pilotage have produced persists across the generations, growing with each pilot's contribution, developing with each campaign's experience, becoming more than the sum of the individuals who contributed to it. The machine spirit remembers. Everything, every campaign, every battle, every pilot, every moment of the centuries of service the throne's neural systems have recorded. The machine spirit's memory is the house's memory, the institutional knowledge of the house's entire military history, preserved in the throne's systems, accessible to the current pilot through the neural link, the ancestors' combined experience providing the wisdom that no single lifetime could accumulate. The knight walks. The pilot steers. The machine spirit guides. The three, the machine, the pilot, the ghost, are the trinity of service that the noble house's theology describes, and that the throne mechanicum makes real. The trinity is not a metaphor. It is the condition of every knight pilot's existence. 3 in 1. The God that walks. The code chivalric is the set of principles that governs every knight pilot's conduct, and the code's origins are as old as the throne mechanicum itself, embedded in the same conditioning protocols that transformed the original construction defense platform operators into the feudal aristocrats they became. The code prescribes 3 virtues above all others: duty, honor, and valor. Duty, the obligation to serve the house, the world, the Imperium, in the order of priority that the noble's oaths establish. Honor, the commitment to conduct oneself in accordance with the standards that the code prescribes, to fight with integrity, to treat defeated enemies with the respect that the code's martial tradition demands. Valor, the willingness to face threats that exceed the individual's capability, to advance when retreat would be safer, to place the protection of those who cannot protect themselves above the pilot's own survival. The virtues are not optional. The code chivalric is enforced through the social structure of the noble houses, through the approval of peers, the judgment of superiors, the shame that a noble who violates the code experiences in a society where the code is the measure of everything a noble is. A pilot who acts with dishonor is not punished through formal mechanisms. The pilot is shamed, excluded from the house's social rituals, denied the recognition that the house's culture provides to its honored members, subjected to the silent judgment of a community whose opinion is the pilot's primary source of social identity. The shame is devastating. The noble houses are small, intimate communities. The pilots number in the dozens or hundreds at most, and the social world within which each pilot operates is sufficiently compact that the loss of standing within that world is the loss of everything the pilot's social existence encompasses. A shamed pilot has not lost a rank or a privilege. The pilot has lost the community's respect, and the community's respect is the only thing that makes the pilot's existence within the community bearable. The code produces warriors of extraordinary commitment. A pilot who fights according to the code, who maintains the virtues of duty, honor, and valor in conditions that test all three simultaneously, is a warrior whose motivation exceeds what institutional discipline alone can produce. The code-driven pilot fights not because the chain of command requires it, but because the pilot's identity requires it. And the identity's requirements are more demanding than the chain of commands, because the identity cannot be disobeyed without the pilot ceasing to be the person the identity defines. The sacristans are the night world's most important non-noble institution, and the institution's importance is inversely proportional to the recognition it receives. A sacristan is a technician, a priest of the machine, a being whose function is the maintenance, repair, and ritual care of the night suits that the noble houses depend on. The sacristans maintain the night suit's physical integrity, the armor, the weapon systems, the power plants, the specific mechanical and electronic systems that the suit's operation requires. The sacristans also maintain the suit's spiritual integrity, the machine spirit, the throne mechanicum's neural systems, the specific quasi-religious relationship between the machine and the technology that the sacristan's traditions describe in the language of devotion rather than the language of engineering. The sacristans are, in practice, members of the Adeptus Mechanicus. This fact is not widely advertised on the night worlds, because the relationship between the noble houses and the Mechanicus is complicated enough without the additional complication of acknowledging that the beings who maintain the house's most important assets are, in fact, agents of an external institution whose interests do not always align with the house's own. The sacristans are inducted into the machine cult. Their training, whether conducted off-world at a Forge World's facilities, or through an apprenticeship to an established sacristan, includes the Mechanicus's religious and technical education, producing beings who are functionally tech priests, operating within the social structure of a feudal society that does not recognize the Mechanicus's authority. The sacristans bridge the gap between the night world's feudal culture and the Mechanicus's technological priesthood, maintaining the technology that the feudal society depends on while operating within the social constraints that the feudal society imposes. The relationship is ancient. The sacristans may predate the Mechanicus's contact with the night worlds. The original colonists would have required technicians to maintain the construction defense platforms, and the technician's role may have evolved into the sacristan tradition independently of the Mechanicus's influence. Whether the sacristans were absorbed into the machine cult when the Mechanicus discovered the night worlds, or whether the sacristans evolved their own machine worship tradition that the Mechanicus later incorporated, is debated by the Imperium's historians without resolution. The houses depend on the sacristans. A night suit that is not maintained by a competent sacristan degrades. The weapons lose accuracy. The armor loses integrity. The throne mechanicum's neural systems develop errors that affect the pilot's connection. A house without sacristans is a house whose military capability diminishes with each campaign, and the diminishing is the slow death that neglected technology produces in every civilization that depends on technology it cannot independently maintain. The serfs are the third element of night world society, the vast majority of the population, the human beings who are not nobles and not sacristans, who farm the land and work the crafts and maintain the infrastructure that the night world's functioning requires. The serfs are not slaves. The code chivalric prescribes the noble's responsibility toward those who serve the house, and the responsibility includes the protection and the governance that the serf population requires. But the serfs are not free. The feudal system that the throne mechanicum created does not accommodate the concept of individual liberty in the way that the Imperium's more progressive worlds understand it. The serf serves the noble. The noble protects the serf. The exchange is not negotiated. It is inherited. The Knight world is a complete society. Nobles, sacristans, and serfs, each with defined roles, each contributing to the whole, each maintained in their position by the social structure that the throne mechanicum's conditioning created 25,000 years ago, and that the intervening millennia have not significantly altered. The conservatism is deliberate. The throne's conditioning pushes the nobles toward the maintenance of existing structures, and the nobles' maintenance of the structures produces the stability that the Knight world's survival across the age of strife demonstrated. The conservatism is the feature, not the bug. The Knight worlds work because they do not change, and they do not change because the beings who govern them have been neurologically conditioned to resist change. The conservatism is also the limitation. A society that does not change is a society that does not develop. The Knight worlds that the Great Crusade discovered were technologically medieval, possessing the knight suits and the sacristan maintained technology that the original STCs had produced, but lacking every other technological development that the intervening millennia might have generated. The Knight worlds had maintained their knight suits. They had not advanced beyond them. The throne mechanicum preserved the Knight worlds. The preservation cost the Knight worlds everything that the preservation prevented. The mechanicum found the Knight worlds during the latter centuries of the Age of Strife, and the finding changed both parties. The mechanicum of Mars, the proto-institution that would eventually become the Adeptus Mechanicus, had been sending exploratory expeditions into the galaxy for centuries, using sublight vessels to reach the nearest star systems in search of the standard template construct technologies that the Mechanicum's doctrine valued above all other knowledge. The expeditions moved slowly. Without warp drives, the voyages between systems took decades. But the Mechanicum's patience was considerable, and the search for STI knowledge was the machine cult's most sacred purpose. The explorers found the Knight worlds, clusters of human-settled star systems that had survived the Age of Strife in the feudal condition the throne mechanicum had produced. Technologically medieval but militarily formidable, governed by warrior aristocracies whose knight suits represented the most powerful ground-based weapons platforms the explorers had encountered outside Mars's own capabilities. The mechanicum saw opportunity. The Knight worlds possessed STC-derived technology, the knight suits themselves, the throne mechanicum systems, the sacristan maintained infrastructure that the original colonization had produced. The technology was valuable. The military capability the technology represented was more valuable still. The mechanicum's interests demanded access to both. The Knight worlds saw saviors. The feudal kingdoms that the throne mechanicum had preserved across the millennia of isolation were hurting. The knight suits needed maintenance that the sacristan's capabilities could not fully provide. The weapons systems needed ammunition that the Knight world's limited industrial base could not produce in adequate quantities. The infrastructure that the colonies had maintained since the dark age of technology was degrading, and the degradation was accelerating, and the sacristan's knowledge, preserved through oral tradition and ritual practice, was insufficient to address the full scope of the decay. The bargain was struck. stuck between desperation and opportunity. The Mechanicum offered maintenance. The Mechanicum offered ammunition. The Mechanicum offered the sacristans access to technical knowledge that the isolation had denied them, and that the Knight suit's continued operation required. In exchange, the Mechanicum received access to the STC technology the Knight worlds possessed, and the military allegiance of the Knight houses. The commitment of the house's military capability to the Mechanicum's campaigns. The bargain was not equal. The Mechanicum's position was stronger. The Knight worlds needed the Mechanicum's maintenance more than the Mechanicum needed the Knight world's military support. And the imbalance produced a relationship that favored the Mechanicum's interests in ways the Knight world's nobles did not fully appreciate until the imbalance had been institutionalized. The Mechanicum's sworn houses, the houses whose allegiance was given directly to Mars or to one of Mars's subsidiary Forge worlds, became the Quaestor Mechanicus. These houses operated under a closer relationship with the Mechanicum than the independently aligned houses, receiving superior maintenance and resupply in exchange for a military commitment that the Mechanicum's representatives directed. The Quaestor Mechanicus houses fought where the Mechanicum told them to fight, supported campaigns the Mechanicum designated as priorities, and maintained the relationship with the machine cult that the original bargain had established. The Great Crusade brought a second option. When the Emperor launched his campaign to reunite humanity's scattered worlds, the Crusade fleets encountered Knight worlds that the Mechanicum had not yet reached. Worlds whose isolation was complete, whose contact with the wider galaxy had not occurred since the dark age of technology's end. These worlds were given the choice of allegiance to the Emperor directly, through the imperial authority that the Great Crusade represented, or to the Mechanicum, through the existing relationship that some Knight worlds had already established. The houses that swore to the Emperor became the Quaestor Imperialis. These houses maintained a greater autonomy than the Mechanicum's sworn houses. Their military commitments were directed by the Imperium's governance, rather than by the Mechanicum's representatives, and their internal affairs were managed with less of the Mechanicum's direct oversight. The Quaestor Imperialis houses retained their feudal traditions with greater independence, their codes of honor and their chivalric practices maintained without the Mechanicum's influence on their rituals and their governance. The two allegiances produced two cultures. The Quaestor Mechanicus houses are more technologically integrated. Their nobles display the Cog Mechanicum's symbol alongside their own heraldry. Their sacristans operate more closely with the Mechanicum's tech priests. Their rituals incorporate the machine cult's devotional practices. The Quaestor Imperialis houses are more traditionally feudal. Their nobles maintain the pure chivalric traditions that the Throne Mechanicum's original conditioning produced. Their cultures emphasize the martial honor that the Code Chivalric prescribes. Their relationship with the Imperium is one of feudal allegiance rather than institutional subordination. Both types of house fight for the Imperium. Both types deploy their knights in the galaxy's wars. Both types sacrifice their nobles on the battlefields where the Imperium's enemies must be faced. The distinction between Quaestor Imperialis and Quaestor Mechanicus is not a distinction of capability or commitment. It is a distinction of culture. The difference between a house whose traditions are primarily martial and a house whose traditions incorporate the technological devotion that the Mechanicum's influence has introduced. The distinction matters to the houses. The Quaestor Imperialis nobles regard the Quaestor Mechanicus houses with the wariness that traditional aristocrats bring to the observation of peers who have adopted foreign customs. The Quaestor Mechanicus nobles regard the Quaestor Imperialis houses with the patience that the practically minded bring to the observation of peers who maintain traditions that the practical do not consider useful. The wariness and the patience do not prevent cooperation. When the knights march to war, the distinction between the two allegiances is subordinated to the common purpose: the destruction of the Emperor's enemies, the protection of the Imperium's worlds, the prosecution of the wars that the knight houses' oaths require them to fight. The allegiance determines who directs the house's military commitments. It does not determine how the house's warriors fight. The fighting is the same. The knight is the same. The pilot in the throne is the same. The bond between the pilot and the machine does not care about institutional politics. The bond cares about the war. The knight suits are not uniform. The STC databases that produced the original construction defense platforms generated multiple patterns, each designed for different roles. And the patterns have been maintained across the millennia by the sacristans and the mechanicus with the reverence that the Imperium brings to any technology it cannot reproduce. The Quaestoris Knights are the standard, the pattern that most people envision when they hear the term Imperial Knight. Standing approximately 12 meters tall, bipedal, armored with plates of adamantium and ceramite, powered by a plasma reactor whose output sustains the suit's movement, weapons, and defensive systems. The Quaestoris pattern is the workhorse, the knight suit that provides the balance of mobility, protection, and firepower that the noble house's standard tactical doctrine requires. The Knight Paladin is the Quaestoris pattern's most common configuration, armed with a rapid-fire battle cannon in one arm and a Reaper chainsword in the other, providing the combination of ranged and melee capability that the Knight's tactical role demands. The battle cannon engages targets at range, vehicles, fortifications, concentrations of enemy infantry, with the explosive force that a weapon of its caliber delivers. The Reaper chainsword engages targets at close range, the massive motorized blade capable of cutting through the armor of vehicles and the hulls of lesser war machines, with the devastating force that the Knight's mass and power output provide. The Knight-Errant replaces the battle cannon with a thermal cannon, a melter weapon scaled to the Knight's proportions, capable of reducing the hardest armor to liquid slag at close range. The Knight-Errant is the tank killer, the specialist whose thermal cannon provides the anti-armor capability that the Paladin's battle cannon cannot match against heavily protected targets. The Knight Gallant abandons ranged weapons entirely, armed with a Reaper chainsword and a Thunderstrike gauntlet, a massive power fist capable of grabbing and crushing enemy vehicles. The Gallant is the close combat specialist, the knight whose role is the direct, physical destruction of the enemy through the application of mass and force at close range. The Gallant charges. The Gallant strikes. The Gallant is the knight pilot's fury expressed through the most direct possible medium: contact. The Knight Warden carries an Avenger Gatling cannon, a multi-barreled rotary weapon whose rate of fire produces a volume of destructive output that exceeds what most infantry formations can survive. The Warden is the infantry killer, the knight whose role is the suppression and destruction of the enemy's foot soldiers through the application of sustained, high-volume fire that the Gatling cannon's design delivers. The Knight Crusader is the ranged specialist, carrying both the Avenger Gatling cannon and either a thermal cannon or a battle cannon, providing the maximum ranged firepower of any Quaestoris configuration. The Crusader fights at distance, maintaining the range that its weapons exploit, and denying the enemy the close engagement that the Crusader's reduced melee capability makes undesirable. The Dominus Knights are heavier, larger than the Questoris pattern, slower, more heavily armored, carrying weapons whose destructive output exceeds the Questoris configuration by a significant margin. The Dominus pattern carries dual plasma cores, two of the reactors that the Questoris pattern powers with one, providing the energy output that the pattern's heavier weapon systems demand. The Knight Castellan is the Dominus pattern's long-range fire support configuration, armed with a volcano lance and a plasma decimator, weapons whose destructive capability places the Castellan at the upper edge of what a single pilot war machine can deliver. The volcano lance is a weapon that the Titan legions carry on their god engines, scaled down for the Knight chassis but retaining the devastating anti-armor capability that the weapon's reputation demands. The Knight Valiant is the Dominus pattern's close support configuration, armed with a thundercoil harpoon and a conflagration cannon. The harpoon is exactly what it sounds like. A massive projectile launched on a chain that impales the target and drags the knight toward it, or, if the target is lighter, drags the target toward the knight. The conflagration cannon is a flamer weapon of extraordinary scale, projecting a torrent of superheated promethium that consumes everything in its path with the thoroughness that the weapon's volume of fuel delivery ensures. The Armiger Knights are the lightest class, smaller than the Questoris pattern, faster, more agile, piloted by the junior members of the noble houses through the helm mechanicum rather than the throne mechanicum. The distinction between the helm and the throne is significant. The helm does not require the ritual of becoming. The helm's neural interface is lighter, less invasive, less personality-altering than the throne. The Armiger pilot bonds with the machine, but the bonding does not carry the same risk of personality consumption that the throne's becoming produces. The Armiger Warglaive is the class's melee variant, armed with a Reaper chain cleaver and a thermal spear. The Warglaive closes with the enemy and fights at the range the chain cleaver demands. The Armiger Helverin is the ranged variant, carrying twin autocannons whose sustained fire provides the anti-infantry and anti-vehicle capability that the Lance's tactical doctrine requires. The Armigers fight as bondsmen, junior members of the house's military hierarchy, operating under the direction of a senior knight pilot whose Questoris or Dominus suit leads the lance. The bondsman relationship is feudal in its structure. The Armiger pilot serves the senior knight's pilot, following the senior's commands, supporting the senior's tactical decisions, fighting in the formation the senior directs. The relationship is training. The Armiger pilot learns the craft of night warfare under the mentorship of an experienced pilot, preparing for the day when the Armiger pilot will undergo the ritual of becoming and ascend to a Questoris or Dominus suit. The progression from Armiger to Questoris to Dominus is the noble's career. The young aspirant begins in an Armiger, learning the basics of night warfare through the helm mechanicum's lighter interface. The aspirant, having demonstrated capability and having received the house's approval, undergoes the ritual of becoming and bonds with a Questoris throne. The experienced pilot, having served the house across decades of campaigning, may eventually be elevated to a Dominus suit, the heaviest, most powerful, most demanding of the knight patterns, reserved for the pilots whose capability and whose relationship with the throne mechanicum have been proven across a career of service. The knight suits are heirlooms, Each suit is maintained across generations, the sacristans repairing the damage that each campaign produces. The house preserving the suit's heraldry and its name and its battle history across the centuries of its service. A knight suit that has been in a house's possession since the dark age of technology is an artifact of extraordinary value, not simply in the military sense, but in the historical and the cultural. The suit carries the house's history. The throne carries the house's ghosts. The name carries the house's honor. The loss of a knight suit is the loss of a family member. The destruction of a suit whose name has been spoken in the house's halls for millennia is a wound that the house carries alongside the wound of the pilot's death, because the suit was not simply a vehicle. It was an ancestor, a companion, a member of the family whose death is mourned with the sincerity that the family's culture prescribes and that the family's grief demands. The knight suits walk. They walk because the nobles who pilot them are the inheritors of a tradition that began with construction defense platforms on colonial worlds, and that has evolved across 25,000 years of war and honor and sacrifice into the Imperium's most personal military force. Each knight has a name. Each knight has a history. Each knight has ghosts. The gods that walk are not empty. The great houses of the Imperial Knights are the 41st millennium's feudal dynasties, and each dynasty carries a character as distinct as the heraldry painted on its knight suit's armor plates. House Terran is the most renowned of the Quaestor Imperialis houses, and the renown is earned through the consistency of the house's military commitment across 10,000 years of imperial service. Based on the night world of Volturis, a world so stable and so peaceful that the house's members find the planet's tranquility actively tedious. House Terran has deployed its knights in more campaigns than most houses can claim across the entirety of their histories. The tedium of Volturis is the engine that drives the house's martial enthusiasm. The world's complex rituals and ceremonial obligations are so exhausting that Terran's nobles actively seek campaigns as relief from the court's demands, exploiting a traditional exemption that permits nobles on crusade to avoid the rituals the homeland's culture prescribes. Terran's knights are painted in the house's distinctive blue and red, with gold trim that reflects the house's wealth and its status as one of the Imperium's premier knight households. The house's martial doctrine is aggressive. The advance, the charge, the direct confrontation of the enemy at the range where the knight's mass and firepower are most devastating. Terran's nobles do not maneuver. They march. The march is the statement. And the statement is this: we are coming, and the coming is the enemy's problem. House Hawkshroud is the Imperium's conscience in knight form. Based on the world of Krastellan, Hawkshroud has built its identity around a principle that exceeds what most knight houses' codes prescribe: the obligation to answer any request for aid from any source, regardless of the cost to the house itself. In 10,000 years of imperial service, House Hawkshroud has refused a request for assistance only 3 times. 3 refusals across 10 millennia. The record is the house's pride and the house's curse, because the commitment to answer every call has left Krastellan itself virtually undefended. The house's knights deployed across the galaxy, fighting other people's wars, honoring the oaths that the house's tradition requires. The oaths are taken seriously beyond what most cultures would consider rational. Hawkshroud's children inherit oaths at birth. The commitments their parents made become the children's obligations. and the children carry those obligations alongside any oaths they make on their own account. A noble of House Hawkshroud may enter adult life carrying a dozen inherited oaths, each demanding service and sacrifice that the noble did not choose, but that the house's culture makes it dishonorable to refuse. Breaking an oath is grounds for immediate exile as a freeblade, the most severe punishment the house imposes, the severance of the bond between the noble and the house that is the noble's entire social world. The house's heraldry is yellow, black, and white, with silver trim, colors that are maintained with a consistency that reflects the house's commitment to its traditions. The yellow is bright, visible, unmistakable on the battlefield. House Hawkshroud does not hide. It announces itself, because the announcement is part of the service. The visible presence of Hawkshroud's knights on a battlefield is a statement to the allies who called for help that the help has arrived. House Griffith is the hunter. Based on the dragon world of Dragon's End, a world whose indigenous fauna includes creatures whose size and ferocity rival the night suits themselves, House Griffith has developed a martial culture centered on the hunt. The nobles of House Griffith hunt their world's apex predators as a rite of passage, engaging the massive creatures in single combat that tests the pilot's skill and the night suit's capability against opponents whose natural weapons can damage even the knight's armored hull. The hunting culture produces warriors of extraordinary individual capability. A Griffith noble who has hunted and killed a dragon of the End, the world's largest and most dangerous predator, has proven herself against an opponent whose ferocity and whose physical capability exceed what most of the galaxy's manufactured threats can match. The hunting is the training, and the training produces pilots whose reflexes and whose combat instincts are sharpened by engagements against opponents who are not following tactical doctrine, but are instead attacking with the pure, undirected violence of a biological predator. House Griffith's knights are painted in red and white, the heraldry bold and clean, reflecting the house's character, direct, passionate, uncomplicated in their approach to warfare. Griffith's nobles charge. The charge is the house's signature, the moment when the knight accelerates to its maximum speed and drives into the enemy formation with the full weight of the suit's mass and the full fury of the pilot's hunting instinct. House Cadmus is the guardian, based on the world of Risa, a planet whose proximity to orc-infested space has produced a state of near-permanent warfare against the greenskin hordes. House Cadmus has developed a martial culture that is less about glory and more about endurance. The orcs attack. Cadmus defends. The orcs attack again. Cadmus defends again. The cycle has been repeating for millennia, and the repetition has produced a house whose character is defined not by the spectacular victory, but by the sustained resistance. Cadmus's knights are painted in green, the color of the forests that cover Risa's surface, the camouflage that the house's tactical doctrine prescribes for a force that fights in woodland conditions against an enemy whose numbers demand the defensive discipline that open field warfare does not permit. The house fights from prepared positions, using the terrain's cover to maximize the knight's defensive advantages, engaging the orcs' masses from positions that the orcs must cross open ground to reach. House Raven is the Questa Mechanicus's premier house, and the house's relationship with the Mechanicus defines its character as thoroughly as the Throne Mechanicum defines its pilot. Based near the Forge world of Metallica, House Raven maintains the closest integration with the Mechanicus of any major house. the nobles displaying the cog mechanicum alongside their own heraldry, the sacristans operating as full members of the machine cult, the house's rituals incorporating the Mechanicus's devotional practices alongside the traditional chivalric ceremonies. Raven's knights are painted in black and red, the colors of Metallica's Forge World, the visual declaration that the house's allegiance is to the Omnissiah as much as to the Emperor. The house's military doctrine reflects the Mechanicus's influence, more methodical than the Quaestor Imperialis houses, more precisely coordinated. The Knight Lances operating with a tactical cohesion that the Mechanicus's strategic planning produces, and that the traditional house's individual combat ethos does not always achieve. House Tyrannus is the oldest, the first Knight House, founded on Mars itself, on the world that would become the Mechanicus's capital in the era before the Mechanicum's establishment, when the Red Planet's colonists built the first construction defense platforms from the STC's designs and piloted them through the Throne Mechanicum's conditioning for the first time. The name Tyrannus means thunder, and the name captures the house's founding character. The first pilots, the first thrones, the first bonding, the first ghosts. House Tyrannus carries the weight of being the origin, the house from which all other houses descend, the lineage whose Throne Mechanicum systems have been operating for longer than any others, and whose ghost content is the densest in the Imperium. Tyrannus's position on Mars places the house in the Mechanicus's shadow, with an intimacy that no other house shares. The house is Quaestor Mechanicus by definition. The house was Mechanicus before the Mechanicus existed. Because Tyrannus's founding predated the machine cult's establishment, and the house was absorbed into the Mechanicus's structure when the machine cult formed around the technology the house had been maintaining. The great houses are not the only houses. The Imperium contains thousands of knight households, houses of every size, every capability, every shade of allegiance between the Quaestor Imperialis and the Quaestor Mechanicus. The great houses are the names that echo across the Imperium, because their military contributions have been the most consistent and the most celebrated. But the lesser houses, the houses whose names are known only in their own sectors, whose campaigns are fought on worlds the Administratum's records barely acknowledge, contribute to the Imperium's wars with the same commitment and the same sacrifice. The Knight worlds number in the hundreds. Each world may host a single house or several. Each house maintains its own traditions, its own heraldry, its own interpretation of the code chivalric. The diversity is the product of isolation, 25,000 years of independent development. Each world producing its own culture from the common foundation that the Throne Mechanicum's conditioning provided. The diversity is also the unity. Every house, regardless of its size or its allegiance or its cultural particularities, shares the common experience of the Throne Mechanicum, the bonding, the ghosts, the personality-shaping conditioning that makes every knight pilot, on every knight world, a member of a fraternity that transcends the differences between houses and that unites the nobility in the shared experience of what the throne does to the beings who sit in it. The great houses march. The lesser houses march alongside them. The knights walk. 10,000 years of marching. 10,000 years of oaths and honor, and the specific, personal, intimate sacrifice that the Throne Mechanicum demands. The names echo, The knights endure. The heraldry on a knight suit's armor is not decoration. It is identity. The colors, the symbols, the markings that the sacristans apply to the knight's hull are the visual expression of everything the knight is. The house it belongs to, the pilot who commands it, the campaigns it has fought, the honors it has earned. Each element of the heraldry carries meaning. The house colors, the primary colors that identify the knight's allegiance, are applied to the suit's largest armor plates, the visual declaration of belonging that is visible across the battlefield at distances that the human eye can assess without magnification. A knight of House Terran is blue and red. A knight of House Hawkshroud is yellow and black. A knight of House Raven is black and red. The colors are instant identification, the visual shorthand that tells every observer, ally and enemy alike, which house this knight serves and what that service means. The personal heraldry is the pilot's contribution. The shield, the tilting plate that the knight carries on one arm, a throwback to the shields that medieval knights carried, and that the knight world's culture has maintained as a surface for the pilot's personal device, bears the pilot's own heraldic achievement. The symbols are personal, chosen by the pilot, approved by the house's heraldic authorities, maintained across the pilot's career as the visual expression of the pilot's identity within the house's broader identity. The campaign markings tell the knight's military history, kill markings, the tallies of vehicles destroyed, the counts of major engagements survived, the notation of specific victories that the house's traditions consider worthy of permanent commemoration, are applied to the knight's armor with the precision that the sacristan's skill provides. A knight whose armor bears dozens of campaign markings is a knight whose service spans decades, and the markings are the visual evidence of the decade's content. The honor banners are the most sacred elements. The cloth banners that the knight carries, suspended from the suit's carapace or attached to banner poles the suit supports, bear the specific achievements that the house's traditions celebrate above all others. A banner may commemorate a battle whose outcome the knight's intervention decided. A banner may honor a previous pilot whose heroism the house considers exemplary. A banner may carry a text, a passage from the Code Chivalric, a prayer to the Emperor, a house motto whose words capture the house's character in a phrase that the battlefield amplifies. The heraldry is maintained by the sacristans with the same care the sacristans bring to the knight's mechanical systems. The colors are reapplied after each campaign, the damage the battle has produced repaired, the paint refreshed, the markings updated with the new campaign's contributions. The maintenance of the heraldry is not cosmetic. It is ritual. The sacristans who repaint the knight's armor are performing an act of devotion, the preservation of the house's visual identity, the maintenance of the knight's honor through the medium that the house's culture employs. Battle damage to the heraldry is treated with specific gravity. A knight whose house colors have been burned away by enemy fire, whose identity has been obscured by the combat's violence, is a knight whose honor has been wounded alongside the armor. The restoration of the colors is the restoration of the honor, conducted by the sacristans with the reverence the restoration requires. The colors reapplied to the damaged plates with the care that sacred objects demand. Some houses maintain their knight suits' original color schemes across centuries. The colors that the house's founder chose, the heraldry that the first pilot painted on the first suit, are maintained without modification across the millennia of the house's history. The continuity is the house's visual testimony to its endurance. The same colors, applied to the same suits, carried into the same kinds of battles for 25,000 years. Other houses evolve their heraldry. The colors shift across the centuries, a shade darkened here, a new element added there. The heraldic devices modified by the contributions of the pilots whose personal achievements have been incorporated into the house's broader identity. The evolution is slow. The throne mechanicum's conservative conditioning resists rapid change. But the evolution is real, and the house whose heraldry has evolved across the millennia carries the visual evidence of its history in the changes the heraldry has undergone. The Freeblade's heraldry is the most varied. A Freeblade who has abandoned a house's colors, who has replaced the house's identity with the personal identity the exile demands, paints the knight suit in colors of the Freeblade's choosing. And the choosing is the expression of the Freeblade's individuality in the medium that the Night World's culture values most. Some Freeblades paint their knights in black, the color of mourning, the visual declaration that the Freeblade grieves the house the exile has lost. Some paint their knights in colors that reference the Freeblade's personal quest, the mission that the exile is pursuing, the redemption the Freeblade is seeking, the purpose the Freeblade has defined in the absence of the house's direction. The heraldry makes each knight unique. In a galaxy of mass-produced weapons and standardized military equipment, the Imperial Knights are individual. Each knight has its own colors. Each knight has its own name. Each knight has its own history, painted on its armor in the language of heraldry that the noble houses have maintained since the construction defense platforms were first given colors by the pilots who operated them. The heraldry is the knight's face, the knight's identity, the visual expression of everything the noble houses are, and everything the noble houses fight for. When the knight walks onto the battlefield, the heraldry speaks. The colors declare the house. The markings declare the history. The banners declare the honor. The enemy sees the heraldry and knows. This knight has a name. This knight has a lineage. This knight has fought before and survived and returned, and the returning is the evidence that the knight cannot be defeated by anything the enemy has previously encountered. The heraldry is the knight's warning. The warning is the knight's first weapon. The rest of the weapons follow. Not every knight serves a house. The Freeblades are the wanderers, the pilots who have been severed from their houses by tragedy, by dishonor, by choice, or by the circumstances that the galaxy's violence produces in abundance. A Freeblade is a knight without a master. The term captures the condition precisely. The pilot who has no house to serve, no liege to obey, no code chivalric to follow except the version the pilot carries in their own conscience. The Freeblade is free in the most literal sense, unbound by the oaths that define the noble house's service, ungoverned by the hierarchy that the house's structure imposes, answerable to no authority except the pilot's own assessment of what honor demands. The freedom is not a reward. For most Freeblades, the freedom is a consequence, the result of a catastrophe that destroyed the pilot's house, or a dishonor that made the pilot's continued service within the house impossible. or a secret shame whose weight the pilot could not carry within the community whose judgment would be applied to it. The most common source of Freeblades is the destruction of a house. The galaxy's wars destroy knight houses with a regularity that the Imperium's strategic planners factor into their force projections. A house whose knight world is overrun by orcs, whose fortress is consumed by tyrannids, whose territory is swallowed by the Great Rift. The survivors of these catastrophes are Freeblades by default. The house is gone. The world is gone. The oaths that the house's existence sustained are broken by the house's destruction rather than by the pilot's choice. These involuntary Freeblades carry the grief of their house's loss alongside the knight suit that is the house's last surviving relic. The pilot's knight, maintained, repaired, its heraldry preserved in the colors of the dead house, is the final proof that the house existed. The Freeblade who fights in a dead house's colors is fighting for the memory of the house as much as for any other cause. And the memory is the motivation that sustains the Freeblade's commitment across the years of wandering that the house's destruction has imposed. The shame-driven Freeblades are the most common subjects of the Imperium's romantic narratives. A noble who has failed, who has broken the code chivalric, who has brought dishonor on the house, who has committed a transgression that the house's judgment condemns, but that the house's mercy does not destroy, is exiled. Sent out from the house's fortress with the knight suit, and nothing else. Stripped of the house's heraldry, forbidden from speaking the house's name, condemned to wander the galaxy in search of the redemption that the exile's purpose prescribes. The redemption is not defined. The house does not tell the exiled noble what act will restore the honor the exile has cost. The noble must find the act, must recognize in the galaxy's endless war the moment that the redemption requires, and must seize the moment with the capability and the conviction that the moment demands. Some Freeblades find their redemption, a feat of extraordinary valor, a campaign whose outcome the Freeblade's contribution decisively influenced, an act of sacrifice that the house's historians record as the redemption's fulfillment. These Freeblades return. The heraldry is restored, the name is spoken again. The exile ends. Most do not return. The galaxy's wars consume the Freeblades the way the wars consume everyone, through attrition, through the accumulated damage that campaigns produce, through the loss of the sacristan support that the houses provide and that the Freeblades by definition do not have. A Freeblade without a sacristan is a knight pilot whose suit is slowly degrading, each campaign's damage repaired imperfectly or not at all. The weapons losing precision, the armor losing integrity, the throne mechanicum developing the errors that neglected maintenance produces. The Freeblades who choose their freedom are the rarest and the most interesting. The nobles who leave their houses not because they are pushed, but because they are pulled, by a cause the house does not endorse, by a mission the house's politics prevent, by the wanderlust that the throne mechanicum's conditioning does not quite suppress, and that some nobles experience as a calling rather than an aberration. Canis Rex is the most famous Freeblade of the current era. Piloted by Sir Hector, the last surviving member of his noble line, a house destroyed by the Iron Warriors, the Chaos Space Marines who captured the house's knight suits and attempted to corrupt their throne mechanicums. Canis Rex, the knight suit itself, the machine whose spirit carried the echoes of Sir Hector's ancestors, resisted the corruption. The machine spirit that animated the suit rejected the Iron Warrior's attempts to bend the throne to Chaos's will, and, in an act of autonomous defiance that the Mechanicus's theology would classify as a miracle of the Omnissiah, freed Sir Hector from his captors. Sir Hector and Canis Rex wander the galaxy, the last of his house, the pilot and the machine bonded by the catastrophe that destroyed everything else, fighting the Imperium's enemies wherever the enemies are found, and wherever the Freeblade's conscience directs the fight. The pair operates without a house's support, without a sacristan's maintenance, without the infrastructure that the great houses take for granted. Sir Hector maintains Canis Rex himself, with whatever resources the galaxy provides, and the maintenance is sufficient because the bond between the pilot and the machine, the relationship that the Throne Mechanicum has refined across the generations of Sir Hector's lost house, produces a connection that transcends the physical. Canis Rex's machine spirit is unusually active. The suit operates with an autonomy that other knight suits do not display, responding to threats that the pilot has not yet perceived, adjusting its stance and its weapons orientation in response to the machine spirit's assessment of the tactical situation. Whether this autonomy is the product of the machine spirit's development across centuries of accumulated pilot impressions, or whether Canis Rex's spirit is genuinely exceptional, genuinely possessed of a capability that exceeds the standard knight suit's machine intelligence, is not determined. The Freeblades sometimes gather Freeblade lances, ad hoc formations of Freeblades who have found each other in the galaxy's wars and who have decided that the advantages of cooperation outweigh the advantages of solitude, operate across the Imperium, providing their military capability to the campaigns that the Lance's members agree are worthy of their attention. The Lances are not houses. They do not have the institutional structure, the heraldry, the Throne Mechanicum heritage that the houses maintain. They are partnerships, temporary or enduring, depending on the members' compatibility and the galaxy's demands. The Freeblades are the Imperial Knights' most romantic element, and the romance is earned. A single warrior in a single war machine, fighting the galaxy's wars without the support that the institutions provide, sustained by nothing except honor and the bond between the pilot and the machine. The Freeblade is the knight stripped to its essence, the individual within the suit carrying the ghosts of a dead house, fighting for reasons that the individual defines rather than the institution prescribes. The Freeblade is the knight's soul exposed. The house provides the structure. The Freeblade provides the meaning. The Throne Mechanicum can be corrupted. This is the fact that the noble houses do not discuss, and that the Chaos Gods exploit with the patience of entities whose timescales exceed mortal comprehension. The throne's conditioning, the behavioral modification that shapes the pilot's personality toward honor, duty, and the conservative feudalism that the throne was designed to produce, operates through the same neural interface that the Chaos Gods' corruption uses. The throne reaches into the pilot's mind. The corruption reaches into the pilot's mind. The mechanism is the same. The input is different, and the difference between the throne's conditioning and the corruption's influence is the difference between the program the throne's designers intended and the malware that the Chaos Gods have inserted. A throne that has been tainted by chaos produces a knight pilot whose personality is shaped not toward honor and duty, but toward the values the corruption promotes. Aggression becomes rage. Duty becomes obsession. The conservative loyalty that the throne's original conditioning produces is replaced by the specific, directed, supernaturally amplified version of the same impulse. Loyalty to the Chaos Gods. Duty to the ruinous powers. The feudal hierarchy's structure maintained, but the hierarchy's master replaced. The corruption can occur in multiple ways. A throne that is exposed to the warp's direct influence. Through a warp rift. Through demonic assault, through the sustained proximity to chaos-tainted environments that some campaigns produce, can absorb the corruption through its neural systems. A pilot who falls to chaos can transmit the corruption to the throne through the neural link, embedding the taint in the machine's systems and ensuring that every subsequent pilot who bonds with the throne is exposed to the same corruption. House Divine is the most infamous example. The Knight House that fell to Slaanesh during the Horus Heresy, corrupted not through the throne's exposure to the warp, but through the moral degeneration of the house's nobility, whose excess and whose depravity reached a concentration that attracted the Prince of Pleasure's attention, and that produced the corruption the house's subsequent history has demonstrated. House Divine's fall was not sudden. It was the accumulation of generations of moral decay, the same process, in miniature, that produced the Aeldari's fall, the same lesson delivered through a different medium. The fallen houses' night worlds are transformed alongside the houses themselves. The feudal societies that the Throne Mechanicum created, the ordered, conservative, honor-bound communities that the conditioning produced, are twisted into nightmarish parodies of their former structure. The noble rules, but the ruling is tyranny. The serf serves, but the service is slavery. The honor that the code chivalric prescribed is replaced by the cruelty that the corruption demands. The night world that was once a bastion of order becomes a well of anarchy from which the taint of chaos seeps into reality with the persistence of corruption finding its level. The populations of fallen night worlds are hunted by their own protectors. The nobles who were supposed to defend the world's inhabitants use the inhabitants as playthings, sport for the hunting, material for the rituals, victims for the exercises in cruelty that the corruption demands, and that the Night Suit's massive capability makes impossibly one-sided. An Imperial Knight hunting the population of its own world is a god turned against its worshippers, and the horror of the image is the horror of the betrayal made physical. Chaos Knights, the war machines of the fallen houses, are visually distinct from their imperial counterparts. The armor plates are warped, twisted, adorned with the symbols of the chaos gods whose patronage the fallen nobles have accepted. The Night Suit's machine spirit, the accumulated consciousness of the Throne Mechanicum's previous pilots, is corrupted alongside the throne itself. The ghosts that guided the Imperial pilot with the Ancestor's wisdom now guide the Chaos pilot with the Ancestor's madness. The accumulated personalities warped by the warp's influence into something that retains the shape of the original, but that has been filled with different content. The Dreadblades are the Chaos equivalent of the Freeblades, Chaos Knights who serve no fallen house, who wander the galaxy's dark places in service of their own corrupted purposes. A Dreadblade may be a Freeblade who fell to chaos, a wandering knight whose isolation exposed the pilot to influences that the house's community would have protected against. A Dreadblade may be the sole survivor of a fallen house, the last knight standing after the house's destruction, carrying the corruption into the galaxy without the institutional structure that the house would have provided. The Dreadblades are among the most feared opponents the Imperium's forces encounter. Because the Dreadblade's capabilities are the Imperial Knights' capabilities enhanced by the warp's power. The Knight suit that has been corrupted by chaos retains its original military capability. The weapons, the armor, the mass and the power that make the Imperial Knight formidable, and adds the supernatural enhancements that the Chaos God's patronage provides. A Dreadblade may be faster than its Imperial counterpart, stronger, more resilient, equipped with weapons that the warp's influence has altered into devices whose effects exceed what the original engineering produced. The cost of the enhancement is the pilot. The Chaos Knight's pilot is consumed by the corruption as thoroughly as the penitent engine's pilot is consumed by the punishment. The personality eroded, the identity replaced, the human being who entered the throne reduced to a vessel for the Chaos God's will. The Chaos Knight pilot is not a warrior making conscious decisions. The pilot is a channel through which the corruption flows, directing the Knight suit's actions with the purposes the Chaos Gods impose, and that the pilot no longer has the capacity to resist. The corruption of the throne mechanicum is the Imperial Knight's deepest fear, because the corruption demonstrates that the bond between the pilot and the machine, the relationship that the houses celebrate, that the code chivalric governs, that the ritual of becoming establishes, is also the vulnerability. The same neural interface that allows the pilot to control the knight allows the knight to control the pilot, and the controlling can be redirected from the throne's original programming to the programming that chaos inserts. The bond is the strength, the bond is the weakness. The same relationship that makes the Imperial Knight the Imperium's most personal weapon makes the Chaos Knight the Imperium's most personal horror. The noble who was supposed to protect becoming the noble who destroys. The oath that was supposed to bind becoming the chain that enslaves. The throne that was supposed to condition becoming the instrument that corrupts. The fallen houses fight the loyal houses. The brothers who share the throne's conditioning fight each other across the battlefields of a galaxy that the conditioning was designed to preserve. The fighting is personal. Knight against knight. Pilot against pilot. The combat conducted at a scale that makes the personal feel cosmic, and at a proximity that makes the cosmic feel personal. The Chaos Knights are the Imperial Knights' mirror. The same machines, the same pilots, the same bond. Different masters. And the difference between the masters is the distance between everything the knights were meant to be and everything the knights can become. The ground shakes before the knight arrives. This is the first thing a soldier on the receiving end of a knight assault notices. Not the visual, not the sound, but the tremor, the rhythmic vibration that the knight suit's footfalls produce in the earth, transmitted through the soil and the bedrock and the surface infrastructure with the regularity of a drumbeat whose volume increases with each repetition because the source of the drumbeat is approaching. The tremor is the warning. The soldiers who feel the tremor and who understand what it means, the veterans, the fighters who have encountered Imperial Knights before, begin to reassess their tactical situation with the speed that survival demands. The soldiers who feel the tremor and who do not understand what it means will learn. The learning is typically brief. The knight appears. Over the horizon, over the ridgeline, over the buildings that the knight's height exceeds, the war machine emerges into the visual field of the soldiers who are about to fight it, and the emergence produces a psychological effect that the knight's physical weapons have not yet begun to impose. The knight is big, The word big does not capture the experience. The knight is the size of a building. It stands 4 or 5 stories tall. It carries weapons whose caliber exceeds what the soldiers below can counter with the infantry portable armaments they carry. It wears armor that the soldiers' weapons cannot penetrate. It moves with a speed that the soldier's assessment of something that big does not predict. Faster than the mind expects. More agile. More predatory. The knight walks toward the soldier's position, and the walking is the assault. The soldiers fire. Lasguns, heavy bolters, missile launchers, whatever the position's weapons inventory contains. The fire strikes the knight's armor, and the knight does not slow. The fire that should suppress an infantry advance, that should halt a vehicle's approach, that should produce the effect that fire is supposed to produce on the target it is directed at, the fire does nothing. The knight absorbs it. The adamantium and ceramite plates that the sacristan has maintained across centuries of service deflect the rounds with the indifference of a being for whom the soldier's weapons are not a threat. They are an announcement. The soldiers are telling the knight where they are. The knight's weapons reply. The battle cannon speaks, a single round, arcing across the distance between the knight and the soldier's position, detonating on impact with a force that the position's fortification was not built to withstand. The explosion consumes the position. The soldiers who occupied it are killed, not through the precision that a sniper's round provides or the attrition that sustained fire produces, through the overwhelming force that a weapon designed to engage tanks delivers against a target that cannot absorb the weapon's output. This is one shot. One round from one weapon on one knight. The knight carries multiple weapons. The knight is accompanied by other knights, the lance formation that the house deploys, multiple war machines operating in coordination, each supporting the others. The combined firepower of a knight lance exceeding what most infantry battalions can produce, and exceeding what most infantry battalions can survive. The soldiers who face a knight lance do not have a good tactical option. The lasguns cannot penetrate the armor. The heavy bolters cannot slow the advance. The missile launchers might damage a knight, might crack a plate, might disable a weapon system, might produce the kind of damage that the sacristan will repair after the engagement if the knight survives. But the missile launcher's effect on a knight lance is the effect of a thrown stone on a charging bull. Technically damage, practically irrelevant. The soldiers run. Or they die. The binary is the same binary the knights have been presenting to their enemies since the construction defense platforms first cleared the predators from the colonial world's frontier, and the binary has not become less stark across the intervening 25,000 years. Inside the knight, the experience is different. The pilot sits in the throne mechanicum. The neural interface connects the pilot's consciousness to the knight's suit systems. And the connection produces a merger, the pilot's awareness expanding to encompass the knight's sensory apparatus. The pilot's intentions translating into the knight's actions. The boundary between the human and the machine blurring into the specific intimate personality-altering fusion that the throne produces. The pilot does not feel small. The pilot feels enormous. The sensory expansion that the throne provides transforms the pilot's experience of the world. The ground is farther away. The horizon is wider. The enemies are smaller. The pilot's perspective shifts from the human scale to the knight scale, and the shifting produces the sense of power that the throne's conditioning amplifies, and that the knight's weapons validate. The pilot walks. Each step covers meters of ground. Each step shakes the earth. The pilot feels the shaking, not as the soldiers below feel it, as a threatening tremor, but as the evidence of the pilot's own power, the physical confirmation that the being walking across this battlefield is the most powerful thing the battlefield contains. The weapons fire. The pilot thinks the firing, and the throne translates the thought into the weapon's discharge. The battle cannon speaks because the pilot wills it. The Reaper Chainsword descends because the pilot directs it. The weapons are the pilot's will expressed through mechanisms that exceed the pilot's body, but that the throne's interface makes feel like extensions of the pilot's body. The ghosts whisper. In combat, the ancestral imprints that the throne contains are most active, the accumulated combat instincts of every previous pilot surging through the neural link, guiding the current pilot's decisions with the reflexive expertise that centuries of warfare have refined. The whispers are not words. They are impulses. Turn left, block high. Fire now. The ghosts do not explain their guidance. They provide it, and the providing produces combat responses whose speed and whose accuracy exceed what the pilot's own training could produce, without the ancestral contribution. The pilot fights. The knight fights. The pilot and the knight are the same thing during combat. The boundary that the non-combat hours maintain between the human and the machine dissolves under the pressure of the engagement, and what remains is a single being, part flesh and part metal, piloting itself through the combat with the unified will that the throne's interface produces. When the knight takes damage, when the enemy's fire penetrates the armor, when the weapons of sufficient caliber strike home, when the knight's systems are degraded by the incoming fire, the pilot feels it. Not as pain in the conventional sense. The throne does not transmit physical sensation from the suit to the pilot. As violation, as the awareness that the body the pilot inhabits has been harmed, and the harm is personal even though the body is mechanical, and the personal quality of the harm produces the rage that the throne's conditioning amplifies, and that the knight's weapons express. The knight that has been damaged is a knight that fights harder. The pilot's fury at the violation, the rage that the throne transforms from the emotional response into the tactical asset, produces a quality of combat intensity that the undamaged knight does not display. The wounded knight is the most dangerous knight, because the wounding has activated the pilot's aggression past the point that the code chivalric's discipline normally constrains. This is the knight in combat, the god that walks, carrying a mortal pilot whose consciousness has merged with the machines, fighting the galaxy's wars with a combination of human will and mechanical power that neither component could produce alone. The enemies who face the knight see a war machine. The pilot who drives the knight feels something different. The knight is not a vehicle the pilot controls. The knight is a body the pilot inhabits. The difference is the Throne Mechanicum's gift. The difference is also the Throne Mechanicum's price. The pilot is becoming the knight. The knight is becoming the pilot. The becoming does not stop. The Horus heresy shattered the Night Houses the way the heresy shattered everything else the Imperium contained. And the shattering followed the same fault lines that the heresy's architects had identified in the Imperium's other military forces. The Night Houses' allegiances were tested. The houses that were sworn to the Imperium, the Quaestor Imperialis, whose oaths bound them to terror and to the Emperor, faced the same choice that every Imperial force faced when the War Master's rebellion began. The choice between the Emperor and the War Master, between the Imperium as it had been constituted, and the rebellion that sought to reconstitute it under Horus's authority. Most houses chose the Emperor, the throne mechanicum's conditioning, the conservatism, the honor, the duty that the throne had embedded in the noble house's psychology across millennia of conditioning, favored loyalty to the established authority. The Emperor was the established authority. The War Master was the challenger. The throne's conditioning pushed the nobles toward the authority they had already sworn to serve. And the pushing produced the loyalty that the Emperor's side of the heresy depended on. Some houses chose Horus. The reasons varied. Some houses had been bound by oaths of fealty to the War Master specifically, sworn during the Great Crusade when Horus's authority was legitimate, and when the oath's implications could not have been anticipated. Some houses were corrupted, their thrones tainted by the warp's influence, their pilots' conditioning redirected from the Emperor's service to the Chaos God's purposes. Some houses chose treachery not because the throne directed it, but because the nobles' own assessment of the political situation favored the War Master's side. House Divine's fall was the most spectacular. The house whose moral degeneration had attracted Slanesh's attention turned during the Battle of Molech, the engagement that saw Horus Lupercal pass through the gate to the realm of chaos and emerge with the power that the passage provided. House Divine's corruption was complete. The house's nobles descending into the Slaneshi worship that their pre-existing excess had prepared them for, the Night Suit's thrones absorbing the corruption that the nobles' fall transmitted through the neural link. The heresy's night against night engagements were the most personal battles the Civil War produced below the Titan level. Knights fighting knights, the same machines, the same thrones, the same neural interface, the same ghosts. The loyalist pilot and the traitor pilot engaged in combat between machines whose similarity made the combat feel like fratricide. The brother's blade meeting the brother's shield with the impact that the Night Suit's mass produced, and the grief that the betrayal's intimacy generated. The night houses emerged from the heresy diminished. Houses destroyed entirely. Their night worlds consumed by the war, their suits destroyed, their pilots killed, their names erased from the rolls of the living. Houses that survived but shattered, their numbers reduced, their strongest suits lost, their heraldry bearing the scars of campaigns that the surviving nobles carry in their throne's memory. The houses that fought for the Emperor carried the heresy's weight into the 10,000 years that followed. The loyalty was proven. The cost of the proving was measured in the house's reduced numbers, the night world's diminished populations, the institutional trauma that a civil war produces in the organizations that survive it. The houses endured. The enduring is the house's testimony to the throne mechanicum's conditioning. The same conservatism that made the houses resistant to Horus's rebellion made the houses resistant to the despair that the rebellion's aftermath might have produced. The scouring. The period after the heresy's end, when the loyalist forces drove the traitors from the Imperium's territory, saw the night houses participate in the campaigns that recovered the worlds the heresy had consumed. The houses fought alongside the loyal legions, the Titan legions, the Imperial Army's successor forces, pursuing the traitors into the territories they had claimed during the rebellion, and reclaiming the Imperium's borders with the determination that the throne's conditioning provided, and that the heresy's grief fueled. The 10,000 years since the heresy have been years of war. The Knight houses have fought in every major campaign the Imperium has conducted. The Wars of Armageddon, the Damocles Gulf Crusade, the 13th Black Crusade, the Indomitus Crusade. The houses have bled. The houses have lost knights and pilots and worlds. The houses have rebuilt, recruited, replaced the losses that the campaigns produced with the sacristan's maintenance and the noble line's continuation. The houses endure. This is the Throne Mechanicum's most significant legacy, not the knight suits, not the feudal hierarchy, not the code chivalric. The endurance. The capacity to absorb loss and continue functioning, to carry the war's grief and the war's damage and the war's accumulated trauma without the carrying producing the collapse that most organizations would experience under the same weight. The throne produces endurance because the throne produces conservative stability, and conservative stability is the quality that endurance requires. The houses do not change. The houses do not evolve. The houses absorb the shocks that the galaxy delivers, and they maintain their structure and they continue their service, and the continuing is the house's gift to the Imperium. The gift is the endurance. The cost is the stasis. The houses have not changed in 10,000 years. The houses will not change in the next 10,000. The throne will not permit it. The Imperial Knights occupy a position in the Imperium's military hierarchy that no other force shares, and the position's uniqueness produces relationships with the Imperium's other forces that are defined by respect, tension, and the misunderstanding that different military cultures inevitably generate. The Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, the Imperium's mortal soldiers, regards the knights with a combination of awe and practical gratitude that the Guard's experience of knight support has produced. A knight lance that arrives on a battlefield where the Guard is fighting transforms the engagement's character. The war machines that the Guard's soldiers cannot destroy, the enemy's tanks. The heavy fortifications, the chaos engines, and the Xenos monstrosities that the Guard's infantry weapons cannot penetrate are targets the knights address with the casual effectiveness that the knight suit's weapons provide. The Guard loves the knight. The love is the practical affection that soldiers develop for any asset that arrives on the battlefield and makes the dying stop. A Knight Lance's arrival at a contested position is the moment when the Guard Sergeant's report changes from position untenable to position held. The Knight's weapons clear the threats the Guard cannot address. The Knight's armor absorbs the fire the Guard cannot survive. The Knight's presence on the battlefield changes the enemy's tactical calculus in ways that favor the Guard's survival, and the favor is reciprocated by the Guard's gratitude and the Guard's willingness to support the Knight's operations with the infantry capability the Knight does not possess. The Knights regard the Guard with the paternalism that the feudal hierarchy produces in beings whose social structure places them above the commoners they protect. The Guard's soldiers are, in the noble house's cultural understanding, serfs, the common people whose protection is the nobility's responsibility, and whose contribution to the warfare is appreciated but not celebrated. The Knights protect the Guard the way the nobles protect the serfs on the Night Worlds, as an obligation, conducted with the sincerity that the code chivalric prescribes, but without the equality that a peer relationship would require. The relationship with the Space Marines is more complicated. The Adeptus Astartes, the transhuman warriors who regard themselves as the Emperor's finest servants, occupy a position in the Imperium's military hierarchy that the Knight's presence complicates. The Space Marines are the Imperium's elite. the Knights are also the Imperium's elite. The two elites operate in overlapping combat environments, engage similar targets, and carry similar institutional pride. And the overlapping produces the friction that parallel elites invariably generate. The friction is managed through the Code Chivalric's deference to the Emperor's genetically crafted sons, and through the Space Marine's tactical appreciation of what a Knight Lance contributes to a campaign. A Knight Lance fighting alongside a Space Marine strike force is a combined arms formation of extraordinary capability. The Space Marine's transhuman combat skill, supplemented by the Knight's walking firepower, the Marine's precision complemented by the Knight's mass. The relationship works because both forces are professional enough to subordinate their institutional pride to the campaign's requirements. The Space Marine captain who fights alongside a Knight Princeps does not waste time debating institutional precedents. The fighting is the priority. The precedents can be debated after the fighting is done, or, more likely, never debated at all. Because the fighting is always ongoing and the fighting is always more important than the debate. The relationship with the Titan legions is the most structurally complex. The Collegia Titanica, the Mechanicus's military arm, controlling the god engines that stride across the galaxy's most devastating battlefields, regards the Knights as the Titan's junior partners. The relationship is literal. Many Questa Mechanicus houses are attached to Titan legions, fighting as vanguard formations that engage the enemy's forward elements before the Titans themselves close. The Knights screen the Titans. The Knights hunt the targets that the Titans' massive weapons would be inefficiently employed against. The Knights operate in the combat environment that the Titans' strategic weapons reshape. The scale difference defines the relationship. A Warlord Titan stands nearly 60 meters tall, 5 times the height of a standard Questoris Knight. The Titan's weapons are strategic: volcano cannons, plasma annihilators, weapons whose destructive output can level city blocks and shatter fortifications that an entire lance of Knights could not breach. The Knight is the Titan's escort, the smaller partner whose capability is significant, but whose scale places the Knight below the Titan in the hierarchy of walking war machines. The Knights accept the hierarchy. The Code Chivalric prescribes deference to the greater, the feudal principle that the lesser serves the greater, and that the serving is honor rather than subordination. A Knight Princeps who fights alongside a Titan Princeps serves the larger war machine's commander with the deference the Code prescribes, providing the tactical support the Titan requires, and accepting the direction the Titan's Princeps provides. The acceptance is not universal. Some Knight houses, particularly the Questa Imperialis houses whose independence is more pronounced, resent the Titan Legion's assumption of superiority. The resentment is managed through the professional discipline that both forces maintain, but the managing does not eliminate the resentment. And the resentment is the quiet friction that the Imperium's military hierarchy produces whenever two forces of comparable pride operate in proximity. The Knights' most interesting relationship is with the forces they protect. The populations of the worlds the Knights defend, the Imperial citizens who witness the Knight Lances striding across their fields and their cities, experience the Knights as something between a military force and a natural phenomenon. The Knight is not a soldier. The Knight is a god. The citizens who watch the Knight walk do not see a vehicle piloted by a mortal. They see a protector whose power exceeds comprehension, whose presence is the promise that the world's defenses include beings whose capabilities transcend the human scale. The citizen's ore is the knight's most significant non-military contribution to the Imperium. The morale effect that a knight lance's deployment produces on a world's population exceeds what the lance's military capability alone can generate. The citizens who see the knights fight believe the Imperium will hold. The believing is the morale that sustains the population through the crisis the knights are addressing. The knights protect the world through their weapons and through their presence. And the presence's effect is the effect of seeing proof that the Imperium's power is as great as the Imperium's rhetoric claims. The knights are walking proof. The citizens who see the proof believe. The believing is the Imperium's most important defensive asset. The Imperial Knight is the Imperium's most visible symbol of protection, and the visibility is the symbol's power. The common Imperial citizen, the hive worker, the agricultural serf, the manufacturer laborer whose existence is defined by the Imperium's grinding industrial demands, lives in a galaxy of threats the citizen cannot see. The Chaos Gods are invisible. The Tyrannid hive fleets are distant. The Orquars are reported in the bureaucratic language of the Administratum's bulletins. Abstractions that do not connect to the citizen's daily experience of the galaxy as a place of routine suffering and institutional indifference. The Imperial Knight is not invisible. The Imperial Knight is the opposite of invisible. The Knight is the most visible military asset the Imperium deploys. A war machine that stands taller than most buildings, that carries weapons whose discharge is audible across kilometers, that walks across the landscape with a physical presence that every being within visual range can perceive, and that no being within visual range can ignore. When the knight walks through a city, when the sacristan's workshop releases the war machine for deployment, when the knight strides through the streets that the city's architecture has not been designed to accommodate, the citizens stop. The workers pause. The routine that defines the citizen's existence is interrupted by the sight of something so far outside the routine's parameters that the routine cannot contain it. The knight is proof. The citizen who sees the knight walking knows, not believes, not hopes, knows, that the Imperium contains beings whose power exceeds the citizen's comprehension and whose purpose is the citizen's protection. The knight is the promise made physical. The Imperium says it will protect its citizens. The knight is the Imperium walking through the citizen's city, carrying weapons that the citizen's mind cannot fully process, wearing armor that the citizen's tools cannot scratch, moving with a purpose that the citizen's daily experience does not encompass. The ore the knight produces is not the ore the Space Marine produces. The Space Marine inspires awe through the transhuman, the superhuman warrior whose capabilities exceed the mortals by a magnitude that makes the mortal feel small. The knight inspires awe through the machine, the walking construct whose scale exceeds the architectural, whose weapons exceed the vehicular, whose presence transforms the landscape from the familiar into the extraordinary. The awe is not fear. The citizens who see a loyal knight walking through their city do not fear it. The knight is their protector, their house's champion, the feudal lord whose obligation includes the citizens' defense. The citizens revere the knight. The reverence is the feudal emotion, the gratitude that the protected feel toward the protector, amplified by the scale of the protection the knight represents, and by the implied threat that the knight's absence would expose the citizens to. On night worlds, the reverence is embedded in the culture. The serfs who live under the noble house's governance regard the knights with a devotion that approaches what the ecclesiarchy's faithful feel toward the emperor's saints. The knight that defends the serf's village is not simply a military asset. It is the village's patron, its guardian. The being whose existence gives the village's existence meaning. The children of the night world serfs grow up watching the knights walk across the field, and the watching produces the loyalty that the feudal system depends on, the conviction that the nobles are the protectors, and that the protection is worth the service the system demands. On imperial worlds that are not night worlds, the hive worlds, the civilized worlds, the planets whose populations have not grown up under the feudal system the throne mechanicum produces, the knight's arrival is an event. The deployment of a knight lance to a world that has not previously hosted the noble house's military capability transforms the world's population's understanding of what the Imperium contains. The citizens who have lived their entire lives under the assumption that the Imperium's military is composed of soldiers, mortal soldiers, walking the same scale as the citizens, carrying weapons that the citizens can at least conceptually understand, are confronted by the reality that the Imperium also contains war machines piloted by single individuals whose capabilities exceed what the citizens had imagined. The confrontation produces faith, not the ecclesiarchy's faith, not the theological devotion to the emperor as God that the ministorum promotes. The pragmatic faith that observation produces. The Imperium is stronger than I knew. The Imperium has more than I imagined. The Imperium can protect me in ways I did not believe were possible. The knight is the Imperium's recruiting poster. The sight of the knight walking changes minds. The citizens who see the knight fight, who witness the knight's weapons destroying the threats that the citizens' own efforts could not address, who watch the knight's armor absorbing fire that would have consumed the citizens' defenses, become believers. Not in the theological sense. In the practical sense, believers in the Imperium's power, believers in the Imperium's commitment, believers in the proposition that the Imperium can protect them against the galaxy's darkness. The belief is the Imperium's most important non-military asset. A population that believes in the Imperium's protection is a population that cooperates with the Imperium's governance. A population that believes is a population that pays its tithes, that provides its soldiers, that maintains the productivity that the Imperium's war economy demands. The knight's contribution to the Imperium is not limited to the enemies the knight destroys. The knight's contribution includes the loyalty the knight's presence produces, the faith that the walking generates in the populations that witness it. The knight walks. The populations believe. The believing sustains the Imperium. The gods that walk are the Imperium's argument made physical. The argument is, we are strong enough. The knight's walking is the proof. On worlds where the knight has walked, the citizens remember. They tell their children about the day the god came. The day the ground shook and the air filled with the sound of the knight's systems, and the sky was dominated by the war machine's towering presence. The children listen. The children remember. The children grow up believing in an Imperium whose power includes the gods that walk. The memory becomes tradition. The tradition becomes culture. The culture becomes the loyalty that the Imperium depends on. The knight walks once. The walking echoes for generations. The Great Rift has divided the night worlds the way it has divided everything else in the Imperium. And the division has tested the house's endurance in ways the previous 10,000 years did not produce. Night worlds on the dark side of the rift, the Imperium Nihilus, the half of the galaxy cut off from the Astronomican's light, face conditions that the house's history has not prepared them for. The isolation that defined the night worlds during the Age of Strife has returned. The communications severed, the supply lines cut. The Mechanicus's sacristan support disrupted by the rift's interference with the travel routes that connected the night worlds to their Forge World patrons. The night houses in the Imperium Nihilus are fighting alone, not the proud chosen isolation of a house that deploys its lances in distant campaigns by choice. The forced isolation of a house whose connections to the wider Imperium have been cut by a phenomenon the house cannot control, and that the house's military capability cannot address. The rift is not an enemy the knights can fight. It is a condition, a permanent, galaxy-spanning reality that the knights must endure rather than overcome. The endurance is what the Throne Mechanicum was designed to produce, and the throne's design is being validated by the conditions the rift has created. The night houses in the Imperium Nihilus maintain their feudal order. The nobles pilot their suits. The sacristans maintain the machines with whatever resources the isolation permits. The serfs farm the fields and maintain the infrastructure and continue the functions that the night world society requires. The conservative stability that the throne's conditioning produces is the quality that allows the night houses to survive the isolation. The same quality that allowed the houses to survive the Age of Strife, tested again by conditions that recall the Age of Strife's worst features. Some houses have fallen, the night worlds that the rift's warp storms have consumed, the worlds whose proximity to the rift's boundary exposed them to the demonic incursions that the rift's corruption produces, have become the fallen worlds that the lore describes with the horror the condition deserves. The nobles corrupted, the thrones tainted, the populations hunted by the beings who were supposed to protect them. The rift has produced more fallen night houses than the previous 10 millennia combined, because the rift's proximity to the warp exposes the thrones to the corruption that the normal conditions of real space do not produce. On the lit side, the Imperium Sanctus, the half of the galaxy that retains the Astronomican's guidance, the night houses have participated in the Indomitus Crusade with the commitment that Guilliman's strategic direction demands. The returned Primarch's assessment of the Night House's capability has produced a deployment pattern that exceeds the House's previous campaigns in scope and in frequency. Guilliman understands what the Knights provide: the tactical weight, the symbolic presence, the walking proof that the Imperium's power is as great as its rhetoric claims, and the understanding has produced demands on the House's resources that the Houses are meeting through the same endurance the throne has always produced. The Houses are tired. This is not a confession the nobles make publicly. The Code Chivalric does not accommodate the expression of weariness, and the throne's conditioning suppresses the fatigue that a human mind would normally feel after decades of continuous campaigning. But the tiredness is visible in the House's records. The reduced numbers, the increasing frequency of Armiga deployments relative to the heavier Questoris and Dominus suits. The Sacristan reports that note the maintenance backlog growing faster than the repairs can address. The Night Houses have been fighting the Imperium's wars for 10,000 years. The fighting has not stopped. The Great Rift has intensified the fighting's frequency and its severity. The houses that emerged from the heresy diminished have been further diminished by the 10 millennia that followed, and the further diminishment has been further compounded by the rift's demands. The houses endure. This is the answer the throne provides to every crisis. Endurance, the conservative stability that absorbs the shock and maintains the structure and continues the service. The endurance has held for 10,000 years. Whether the endurance can hold for 10,000 more, whether the diminishing returns that the continuous fighting produces will eventually reduce the houses past the point of viability, is the strategic question that the Imperium's High Command does not publicly address. The Knight Worlds are the Imperium's feudal backbone. The noble house's military contribution, measured across the aggregate of the Imperium's campaigns, exceeds what the individual engagements suggest. The Knights are not the Imperium's primary military force. The Astra Militarum's numbers and the Adeptus Astartes' capability occupy that position. But the Knights are the Imperium's reinforcing force. The walking firepower that arrives when the primary forces need support, the tactical weight that tips the balance, the walking proof that sustains the morale. The backbone is under strain. The Great Rift's demands, layered on top of 10 millennia of accumulated demands, are testing the backbone's capacity. The testing has not produced failure. The testing has produced the fatigue that failure's precursor represents. And the fatigue is growing. The Knight Houses fight on. The throne's conditioning does not permit the recognition of fatigue as a legitimate condition. The conditioning says fight. The conditioning says endure. The conditioning says serve. The nobles obey the conditioning because the nobles are the conditioning's products, and the products do not question the factory that made them. A Night World noble is born into a destiny that the noble does not choose. And the not choosing is the condition of the noble's existence, from the first breath to the last. The noble is born into a house. The house determines everything. The world the noble inhabits, the culture the noble absorbs, the code chivalric the noble follows, the knight suit the noble will eventually pilot if the noble survives the training and the ritual of becoming. The house is not a family in the human sense. It is an institution, a military, political, social entity that encompasses the noble's entire world and that defines the noble's entire purpose. The training begins in childhood. Not the formal military training that will prepare the noble for the throne mechanicum. That comes later. The cultural training, the inculcation of the values that the house's traditions prescribe and that the throne's conditioning will reinforce. Honor, duty, valor. The conservative reverence for tradition that the throne's programming produces in every noble it touches. The child learns the house's history. The child memorizes the names of the house's knights, each suit's name, each suit's battle history, each suit's previous pilots. The child is raised in the awareness that the knight suit is not simply a machine. It is a member of the family, as real and as valued as the human members, carrying the house's honor alongside the house's weapons. The noble's adolescence is dominated by the preparation for the becoming. The aspirant, the young noble who has been selected as a candidate for the ritual, undergoes years of conditioning that the house's sacristans and the house's senior nobles direct. The conditioning is physical. The body must be prepared for the neural interface's demands. The nervous system strengthened against the throne's psychological pressure. The conditioning is psychological. The mind must be fortified against the ghosts, the ancestral imprints that will surge through the neural link during the becoming's critical moment. The conditioning is also emotional. The aspirant is trained to expect the loss of self, not the total loss, not the consumption that the becoming's failures produce. The partial loss, the surrender of the aspects of the personality that the throne does not value. The suppression of the qualities that the throne's conditioning will remove over the decades of the pilot's service. The aspirant knows, or is told in the language that the house's traditions employ, that the person who enters the throne will not be entirely the person who sits in it after the bonding is complete. The becoming occurs. The aspirant descends into the knight suit's cockpit, the chamber that contains the throne mechanicum, the neural interface, the accumulated ghosts of every previous pilot. The aspirant sits. The throne connects. The ghosts arrive. If the becoming succeeds, the aspirant emerges as a knight pilot. The noble now carries the ghosts. The ghosts carry the noble. The relationship between the pilot and the machine, the bond that will define the noble's existence for the rest of the noble's life, has been established, and the establishing cannot be undone. The noble fights, campaigns, crusades, the wars that the house's oaths require and that the Imperium's needs demand. The noble pilots the knight suit across battlefields whose variety exceeds what most military careers encompass. Xenos worlds, heretic strongholds, daemon-infested territories, the diverse geography of a galaxy that produces threats in every environment, and that the knight houses address with the versatility that the code chivalric demands. Between campaigns, the noble lives the life the knight world provides. The courtly functions, the ritual observances, the governance of the serfs who depend on the noble's protection, the maintenance of the knight suit, conducted alongside the sacristans, the pilot's participation in the maintenance rituals expressing the bond between the noble and the machine through the act of caring for the machine's physical well-being. The court life is tedious. The sources agree on this point with unusual unanimity. The nobles of every knight world, regardless of the world's culture, find the courtly life significantly less engaging than the campaigning. The rituals are elaborate and time-consuming. The governance is demanding but repetitive. The social obligations that the house's traditions prescribe consume hours that the noble would prefer to spend in the throne, and the preference is the throne's conditioning expressing itself through the noble's desires, directing the pilot toward the activity the throne values, and away from the activities the throne does not. The noble ages. The decades of service accumulate. Campaigns fought, knights repaired, wounds sustained and healed, the slow reshaping of the personality that the throne's continued influence produces. The noble at 60 is not the aspirant who underwent the becoming at 20. The personality has shifted. The values have intensified. The honor that the throne promotes has become the dominant quality of the noble's character. And the qualities the throne suppresses have faded to the point where the noble cannot remember possessing them. Some nobles resist the reshaping, the awareness that the throne is changing them, that the person they are becoming is the person the throne is making rather than the person they would have become without the throne's influence, produces a discomfort that the noble cannot fully suppress, and that the noble cannot openly express, because the expressing would be an admission that the throne's conditioning is unwelcome, and the admission would violate the code chivalric's prescription of duty and acceptance. The resistance does not work. The throne's influence is gradual and cumulative, and the cumulative exceeds the resistible. The noble who resists the reshaping at 20 is the noble who has accepted it at 40. Not through surrender, but through the erosion that sustained influence produces in every mind it touches. The noble retires. The retirement, when the noble's age or injuries have reduced the pilot's capability below the standard the house requires, is accompanied by the transfer of the knight suit to the noble's heir. The suit passes from parent to child, from mentor to aspirant, the heraldry unchanged, the ghosts enriched by the retiring noble's imprint. The throne carrying one more consciousness into the next generation's service. The retired noble joins the household's advisory council, the elder, whose decades of throne shaped wisdom the house values as the product of the conditioning's refinement, advises the ruling noble on matters of governance and warfare, providing the perspective that the throne's accumulated experience produces, and that the younger noble's less developed conditioning does not yet encompass. The noble dies. The death is mourned by the house with the rituals the house's tradition prescribes. The knight suit endures. The throne carries the noble's ghost. The ghost joins the chorus of the ancestors, adding one more voice to the throne's accumulated consciousness, one more personality to the weight that the next aspirant will face during the becoming. The cycle continues. Parent to child, pilot to aspirant, ghost to ghost. The knight endures, the noble does not. The noble's contribution to the knight, the imprint, the ghost, the accumulated decades of service preserved in the throne's neural systems, endures alongside the machine, carried into the future by the suit the noble piloted and the throne the noble sat in. The noble's immortality is the knight's memory. The noble lives on in the ghosts. Whether the living on is genuine survival or the echo of a consciousness that the throne has reduced to an imprint is the question that the noble houses do not ask, because the asking would require an answer, and the answer might be the one the houses cannot afford to hear. The Donatos uprising is the Imperial Knights' most devastating recent betrayal, and the devastation demonstrates what happens when the throne mechanicum's conditioning fails and the noble house's internal trust is violated. Donatus Primus was an industrial world, a planet whose manufacturing capability made it strategically significant, and whose defense was entrusted to the knight houses of the nearby knight world of Adrastopol. 5 noble houses maintained their strongholds on Adrastopol, and 5 houses deployed their lances when the world of Donatus Primus came under threat from heretic forces. High King Tolwyn of House Draconis led the crusade. The 5 houses, Draconis, Minotos, Pegason, Chimeros and Wyvorn, committed their knights to the campaign with the combined force that 5 houses could bring, the lance formations marching together with the coordination that the houses' shared Adrastopolan culture provided. The campaign's early phases proceeded as the tactical assessment predicted. The heretic forces on Donatus Primus were engaged, the knight lances' combined firepower providing the decisive advantage that the house's deployment was designed to deliver. The heretics fell back. The advance continued. The campaign was proceeding toward the conclusion the houses expected, and then houses Chimeros and Wyvorn turned. The 2 houses, whose thrones mechanicum had been tainted by chaos through methods the loyal houses had not detected, revealed their corruption in the middle of the campaign, turning their weapons on their allies with the devastating effectiveness that the betrayal's surprise provided. The knights of houses Chimeros and Wyvorn, machines that had been fighting alongside the loyal houses moments before, whose pilots had shared the march and the battle and the fellowship that the Adrastapolan culture produced, opened fire on the knights of houses Draconis, Minotos, and Pegason. The betrayal was not an assault by strangers. It was fratricide. Knight fighting knight, the same machines, the same training, the same code chivalric betrayed by the two houses that had been corrupted and whose corruption had been concealed within the trust that the shared culture produced. The loyal houses were devastated. The surprise of the betrayal and the effectiveness of the corrupted houses' attack produced casualties that the loyal houses' tactical position should not have permitted. Knights that had been advancing with their armor, facing the heretic enemy, were struck from behind by allies whose weapons found the gaps in the knights' defenses. Gaps that existed because the knights had not been defending against their allies. The aftermath was as destructive as the betrayal itself. The Ordo Malleus of the Inquisition, the branch dedicated to the investigation of demonic activity, dispatched representatives to Adrastapol to determine how two knight houses could be corrupted without the other house's knowledge. The investigation's findings are classified, but the investigation's occurrence is itself an indictment. The Inquisition's involvement means the corruption was not a conventional moral failure. It was demonic. The throne's mechanicum of houses Chimeros and Wyvorn had been reached by the warp's influence, and the reaching had been conducted with sufficient subtlety that the house's allies, the nobles who had fought alongside the corrupted houses for generations, had not detected the corruption. The Donatos uprising demonstrates the Imperial Knights' most dangerous vulnerability: the trust. The Knight houses operate on trust, the trust between the pilot and the throne, between the noble and the house, between the allied houses that share a Knight world. The trust is the product of the feudal culture the throne mechanicum creates. The honor, the duty, the code chivalric's prescription of loyalty as the highest virtue. The trust makes the houses effective, because the trust produces the cohesion that the house's military operations require. The trust also makes the houses vulnerable, because the trust prevents the suspicion that the corruption's detection would require. A noble house that trusted its allies less might have detected houses Chimeros and Wyvorn's corruption before the corruption produced the betrayal. But a noble house that trusted its allies less would not be a noble house. The trust is the thing that makes the feudal system function, and the functioning requires the trust's maintenance, and the maintenance prevents the questioning that the corruption's detection demands. The Donatos uprising is the heresy in miniature. The same pattern, trusted allies corrupted by chaos, the betrayal conducted from within the trust's radius, the devastation produced by the surprise that the trust prevents, replicated at the scale of knight houses rather than at the scale of legions. The lesson is the same. The institutions that trust produces are the institutions that trust makes vulnerable, and the vulnerability is not a flaw that can be corrected without destroying the trust that the institution depends on. The surviving houses of Adrastapol rebuilt. House Draconis, House Minotos, House Pegason, diminished, grieving, carrying the Donatos uprising's trauma alongside the house's other accumulated griefs. The rebuilding was the throne's answer to the crisis, the conservative stability reasserting itself, the structure maintained, the endurance holding. But the trust was damaged. The trust between the surviving houses, the trust that the shared Adrastapolan culture had maintained across millennia, was eroded by the knowledge that 2 of the 5 had been corrupted. The surviving houses look at each other with a wariness that the pre-Donatos culture did not contain. And the wariness is the corruption's most lasting victory, because the wariness undermines the trust that the house's effectiveness depends on. The corruption won not by destroying the houses. The corruption won by damaging the thing the houses need most. Trust, the one thing the code chivalric cannot restore once it has been broken. The Imperial Knights are the 41st millennium's most concentrated exploration of a question that the entire Imperium avoids. What does it mean to be changed by the thing you serve? Every institution in the Imperium changes its servants. The Space Marines are changed by the gene seed, their bodies altered, their psychology reshaped, their humanity sacrificed on the altar of the transhuman capability the gene seed provides. The Sisters of Battle are changed by the faith, their individualities submerged in the collective devotion, their personalities shaped by the conviction that the faith demands. The Mechanicus's tech priests are changed by the machine, their flesh replaced by metal, their minds rewired by the data streams that the augmentation provides. The Imperial Knights are changed by the throne. But the change the throne produces is different from the change the other institutions produce, because the change is invisible. The Space Marines' change is physical, visible in the transhuman body, the size, the armor. The Sisters' change is behavioral, visible in the faith's expression, the devotion, the ritual. The Tech Priest's change is mechanical, visible in the augmetics, the metal, the merger of flesh and machine. The Night Pilot's change is psychological, internal, hidden beneath the skin, operating in the space between the pilot's thoughts, reshaping the pilot's personality through mechanisms the pilot cannot perceive. The noble who sits in the throne for decades does not see the change. The noble does not feel the change in the way that a Space Marine feels the gene seed's modification, or a tech priest feels the augmetics integration. The change occurs below the threshold of awareness, and the subtlety is the change's most significant quality. Because the quality means the pilot does not know what the throne is doing to them. The noble who has been sitting in the throne for 30 years is a different person from the aspirant who underwent the becoming. The difference is not visible. The difference is not experienced by the noble as a loss. The throne's conditioning does not produce the awareness of change. The noble does not wake up one morning and recognize that the person looking back from the mirror is not the person who entered the throne 3 decades ago. The change is gradual enough that the changed person cannot distinguish the changed state from the original state, because the changing has altered the frame of reference that the distinction requires. This is the throne mechanicum's most profound effect, and its most troubling quality. The pilot is being changed, and the pilot does not know. The personality is being shaped, and the shaped person cannot perceive the shaping. The human is becoming the thing the throne was designed to produce, and the becoming is invisible to the being who is becoming. The feudal bargain, the exchange of service for protection, of duty for honor, of the individual's autonomy for the institution's security, is the social expression of the throne's neurological conditioning. The noble serves the house because the throne has conditioned the noble to serve. The noble honors the code because the throne has conditioned the noble to honor. The noble fights because the throne has conditioned the noble to fight. The choices that the noble believes are freely made The choices that the code chivalric celebrates as the expression of the noble's character are choices that the throne's conditioning has determined in advance, embedded in the noble's psychology through decades of subtle, imperceptible, personality-altering influence. Whether the conditioned choice is a genuine choice is the philosophical question the Night World's culture does not ask, because the asking would undermine the cultural mythology that the code chivalric maintains. The mythology says the noble chooses honor. The reality may be the throne chooses honor for the noble. The distinction matters philosophically. It does not matter practically, because the practical outcome, the noble fighting with honor regardless of the honor's source, is the same. The ghosts are the throne's most intimate expression of the change. The ancestral imprints that the throne carries, the echoes of every previous pilot, preserved in the neural systems, active during combat, guiding the current pilot with the reflexive wisdom of the dead, are the most direct evidence that the pilot is not alone in the throne. The pilot sits in a chair that is already occupied. The pilot's mind shares a space with minds that are not the pilot's. The pilot's choices are influenced by beings whose existence is the echo of lives already lived. The ghosts are the ancestors. The ancestors are the throne. The throne is the conditioning. The conditioning is the identity. The night pilot's identity is not self-generated. It is inherited from the house, from the code, from the throne, from the ghosts that the throne carries. The pilot who believes they are making choices is making choices that the accumulated weight of centuries of conditioning has pre-approved. And the pre-approval is invisible, and the invisibility is the condition of the pilot's existence. This is not slavery. The throne does not enslave the pilot. The throne produces a person whose freely made choices happen to align with the choices the throne was designed to produce. The freedom is genuine. The pilot chooses. The choices are conditioned. The range of choices the pilot is capable of making has been narrowed by the throne's influence to the range the throne endorses. The distinction between conditioned freedom and genuine freedom is the distinction the Night World's culture has been navigating for 25,000 years. And the navigation has produced a civilization that functions with extraordinary stability and that produces warriors of extraordinary commitment. And whether the stability and the commitment are purchased at the cost of the autonomy the throne removes is the question that the stability and the commitment prevent the Night Worlds from asking. The Imperial Knights are the Imperium's purest feudal institution. The feudalism is genuine, not the administrative convenience that some Imperial worlds maintain, not the decorative tradition that the Imperium's aristocracy employs. Genuine feudalism, produced by genuine conditioning, maintained by genuine social pressure, sustained across 25,000 years of continuous operation. The genuineness is the throne mechanicum's achievement. The genuineness is also the throne mechanicum's indictment. The noble houses do not ask which. The throne does not permit the asking. Somewhere on a night world, a young noble is preparing for the ritual of becoming. The suit waits. The knight, the war machine that has carried the house's honor across centuries of campaigns, whose armor bears the scars of engagements the aspirant has studied since childhood, whose name the aspirant has spoken in the house's halls alongside the names of the living, stands in the sacristan's workshop, maintained, repaired, ready. The throne mechanicum is warm. The systems are active. The ghosts are stirring. The aspirant descends. The cockpit opens. The throne waits, the chair that will connect the aspirant's nervous system to the machine's neural network, the interface that will bridge the gap between the human and the mechanical, the device that will introduce the aspirant to the ancestors whose ghosts the throne contains. The aspirant sits. The becoming begins. The ghosts arrive. The accumulated consciousness of every noble who has piloted this night, the imprints, the echoes, the residual personalities preserved across centuries of service surge through the neural link. The aspirant's mind is flooded. The ancestors introduce themselves. Not through language, not through the formal protocols that the living used to communicate. Through memory, through the raw, unfiltered experience of lives already lived, compressed into a single moment of overwhelming psychic contact. The aspirant screams, or does not scream. The response is individual. Some aspirants meet the ghosts with the composure that the training has prepared, and some aspirants are overwhelmed by the ghost's weight. The screaming does not determine the outcome. The outcome is determined by the aspirant's capacity to hold the self together while the ghosts press against it. The ability to maintain the identity that the aspirant carries against the accumulated identities the throne contains. The aspirant survives. The ghosts settle. The throne's conditioning begins its work. The subtle, imperceptible, decades-long process of reshaping the aspirant's personality toward the values the throne endorses. The aspirant does not feel the reshaping begin. The aspirant feels the power. The knight suit's systems are responding to the aspirant's thoughts, the weapons charging, the legs flexing, the armor's servos engaging with the movements that the aspirant's neural commands direct. The aspirant stands. The knight stands. 12 meters of war machine, responding to the thoughts of a single human being, the bond between the two established in the moment of the becoming, and sustained by the throne's neural interface across the decades of the pilot's service. The aspirant walks. The knight walks. The ground shakes. The sacristans in the workshop look up at the machine they maintain, seeing it move for the first time under its new pilot's direction, the heraldry unchanged, the weapons unchanged, the suit unchanged, and the pilot within it, the newest member of the throne's accumulated chorus, beginning the journey that will end only when the pilot's own ghost joins the ancestors. The knight walks out of the workshop and onto the world's surface. The sun hits the armor, the heraldry shines. The house's colors, whatever colors the house has maintained across the centuries of its tradition, are displayed on the knight's hull with the pride that the colors represent, and the history that the colors carry. The aspirant is a knight pilot now. The aspirant is a noble. The aspirant is the inheritor of a tradition that began with construction defense platforms on colonial worlds, and that has endured across 25,000 years of war and honor and sacrifice, and the throne's quiet conditioning into the 41st millennium. The night world serfs look up. They see the knight walking across their fields, the war machine that protects them, the noble who governs them, the walking proof that their world's defense includes a power that exceeds the mortal scale. The serfs do not understand the throne mechanicum. They do not know about the ghosts, the conditioning, the slow reshaping of the pilot's personality that the throne produces across the decades of service. They see the knight. They see the protector. They see the god that walks. The god walks because a mortal sits in the chair. The mortal sits in the chair because the chair was designed to produce the kind of mortal who would want to sit in it. The wanting is genuine, and the wanting is conditioned, and the distinction between the two is the distinction that the night world's culture does not draw, and that the night pilot cannot perceive. The Imperial Knights have been walking for 25,000 years. They walked through the Age of Strife. They walked through the Great Crusade. They walked through the heresy and the scouring and the 10,000 years of the Imperium's subsequent history. They walk now, in the era Indomitus, across the battlefields of a galaxy that the Great Rift has torn in half, and that the enemies of humanity are working to destroy. They will walk tomorrow. The houses will deploy their lances. The nobles will pilot their knights. The thrones will carry the ghosts. The code chivalric will prescribe the values. The sacristans will maintain the machines. The serfs will watch the walking and believe. The knight walks. The pilot inside the knight is a mortal. The mortal is changing. The throne is changing the mortal, slowly, subtly, across the decades of the service, reshaping the person toward the values the throne was designed to produce. The changing is the cost. The changing is the service. The changing is the bargain that every night pilot makes with the throne that carries the ghosts, and that will eventually carry the pilot's ghost alongside them. The knight walks. The pilot fights. The ghosts whisper, the throne hums. The tradition is 25,000 years old. The tradition will endure because the throne was designed to produce endurance. And the throne has not failed. And the throne will not fail, because the throne does not change, and the throne does not permit the beings who sit in it to change. The noble houses march. The lances form. The night worlds send their gods to walk the galaxy's battlefields in defense of the Imperium, and in service of the oaths that the throne's conditioning has made the nobles incapable of breaking. For duty, for honor, for the house. The knights walk. The ground shakes. The gods endure.